All right, welcome everyone to the October 2024 FMDiSC meeting. FileMaker developers in Southern California, though as I was saying a little earlier, the name is a little bit of a historical record at this point since we have people from all over the world joining us. We're going to kick off right away with our first presentation, which is a bit of a panel, but then we also want to make it a roundtable, get everybody involved in this since this is a topic that I think most FileMaker developers wrestle with at one point or another with one project or another. So the topic is repair, remodel, rebuild. And Dave Knight is going to be moderating. And we've got Cris Ippolite and Aronson joining us for the initial part. And then, like I said, we're going to open it up and let everybody sort of chime in with their experiences and their thoughts. So Dave, take it away.
Thanks, Jonathan. Good seeing some faces here we haven't seen in a while. Yeah, it was funny. I was talking with one of our staff members, and we had one of those clients come in with the system, and we really struggled trying to figure out, is this something that needs a coat of paint? Is this something that we need to, change out the air conditioner unit, or do we just knock it all down and start from fresh? And I think there's a lot of thought that goes into this. I've been really fortunate to harness the CEO of iSolutions, Cris Ippolite, who's been with us before. Everybody knows Cris, well known in the community, a big, strong contributor for many, many years. Some of you also may know a longtime friend of mine, Aronson, basically founder of Fullcity Consulting in New York, headquartered. Adam has quite a bit of experience in this area too. And like Jonathan was mentioning, this is something I think there's going to be a lot of really good insights from the peanut gallery too. So don't feel afraid to throw your hand up and so forth. So I want to kind of divide this session into two basic premises. Number one, business. Number two, technical. So when you're looking at a system, I think everything kind of distills down to one of those two things. I think we're as database developers and app developers and so forth, I think our tendency is only to talk about, well, they're not using the variables in a really good way or what have you. But I want to start the conversation with business, and I'll throw it out there to Cris initially. Cris, you're looking at somebody. You meet somebody. They go, "We got this existing system, and we want to. By the way, our business is now going from X to Y." What are some of the concerns that you have, or what are the things that you evaluate?
It's interesting. The very first thing that popped into my head when you guys notified me about this topic was like even a half a step before that. And that's the kind of sensitivity to that initial conversation with this. Let's say this is a new customer to like, I kind of don't want to come off from just a pure sales perspective that like, it seems like we want to push them to rebuild because that would be more advantageous for the developer, right? Like I think the perception to the customer is, well, of course these guys are going to talk me into rebuilding this thing from scratch because that's better for them, right? So I almost feel like when you're assessing this, where you're having those conversations and you're looking at all the variables and whatever the customer's unique scenario is, that like, I mean, I almost find myself like, okay, how do I make that not seem like the answer? But even if it is the answer, like there's just sort of like kind of talking around that. So I thought that would be interesting to kind of just throw out there as just sort of a thing that we have to, an elephant in the room, so to speak, right? When it comes to these things. So I think that's the first business thing is the sensitivity to what it seems like coming in as the new consultant. And then also the fact that they've got a lot of actual debt. Like we're talking about technical debt in a separate part of this conversation, but actual investment here. And I would imagine from a sensitivity standpoint that any customer would feel like I really want to get some equity out of that. So what I find that we do is use the term equity and talk about, if the decision is to like maintain and build on top of it, really point out the areas of why we don't think this thing needs to be scrapped and really have discussions about those to kind of add value for them so they can connect the dots back to their original investment.
Yeah, that's well said. That disarming part, you're going to try to sell me. A lot of the time, if I'm talking with somebody with no systems in place, I'll say, we're going to discuss 2 or 3 options. One of them is free. Here's a FileMaker template. You guys can do it yourself, knock yourself out. I want them to hear that, so that barrier lowers, so they're going, okay, this guy's trying to sell me something. But Adam, what are your thoughts on this?
A number of things. I was thinking about this morning on the ramp up to this, and I think a lot of what Cris just said is kind of where I wanted to start the conversation. Is for me the initial engagement with the customer in this situation is education, right? It's okay, you have an existing system. Like Cris said, you have a ton of equity and sweat and money into that system. Let's talk about that openly. Let's not just pivot to the rebuild. There are a number of times where we've heard customers say, I'm talking to you because previous developer XY told me, oh yeah, we're just scrapping everything and we're starting from scratch, right? And like Cris said, you have to be very sensitive to that for a number of reasons. But I think just educating is the first step, right? What does it mean? What do you have? What does that mean in finance and money and in investment? And what we've over the past couple of years, what we've started doing in situations like this, and is to say, you know what, maybe we don't know enough to make that decision right now. Maybe we should get in and kind of take over the maintenance and swim in the waters a little bit, take over the maintenance of your system, get to know your users, get to know the use cases, so that like maybe for the first 6 months, it's just, get in, get comfy and learn everything. And then 6 months from now, let's sit down and have a different conversation that's much more informed than it is right now.
Yeah, that's a lot of the times I use metaphors, analogies, and you walk in to the doctor and go, my knee hurts, and if you're talking with a surgeon, he's like, we've got to fix that with surgery, right? You get the right assessment by that doctor, they're going to go, well, we can try stretching, we can try some medications, we can try a number of options, and you don't get that assessment if you don't spend time with them and learn their world and how their systems are either supporting or detracting from what they're trying to do. When you get to that point, when you get to the point, what are some of the business shifts that you gentlemen see that you go, ooh, so let's just say we've made that assessment. We've got some buy-in from the customer. We've looked into their workflow. We've looked into their world a bit. And we go, these are the types of things that I go, wow, the business premise. Like, let me just give you guys an example. We had a customer had a field repair system, and we built things for iPads for him eventually, et cetera. But he actually went from a staff-based thing to, no, I'm going to use a bunch of independent contractors who are going to use my system, and humongous amount of structural changes, financial tracking, things of that nature. What are those types of things where when you're hearing the business, you're looking at the system, you know what they do, and they go, we're going to be going this direction. What are the things that tend to trigger you in those areas?
Yeah, I think that's I think that's really a unique problem that we might have in the FileMaker community. And I say that because FileMaker has been around like decades longer than a lot of the platforms that people are building on top of. We are considerably more likely, I don't have the data, but I would guess and feel really confident about this statement that we're more likely to encounter legacy systems than anyone else would. And I think all of us agree, like if we could just like onboard from scratch systems that we get a chance to do some specs on, all of us would be happier. The reality of it is, for us over here, I think the majority of the new systems we've onboarded here at iSolutions in 2024 were existing systems that that we're taking over, they built internally, and we're assisting them with. So to that point, then you think about new requirements, kind of like you're talking like, well, if in that case you're going this direction, like I think it makes it really a lot easier to have we're not trying to just get you to rebuild because we want the biggest impact from a sales standpoint. But it really is about the future, like their growth strategy and scalability. And I think what you're touching on in that specific example, I think is probably one of the biggest factors, scalability. Like literally saying like you're going from X number of users to now X number of users, in your case, like out in the field and maybe previously unknown users. Huge deal, big deal. Look at the infrastructure. Can it support it? Can the workflows support this? If the answers are no in some of those cases, I think the customer is going to be more like agreeable to, yeah, okay, this is kind of a new thing, and maybe there isn't a whole ton of equity, you know, in the previous system as a result. So the scalability thing, I think, introduces that. And so I would just point to that in your example as something that I would hear and go, oh, okay, well, this is probably a softer landing on a potential rebuild if necessary, really.
Adam, have you had that? You know, Cris makes a really good point. We've been standing with customers have been standing in this platform forever, and the likelihood of their business, guess what? Business has changed. The environment, the world changes. You've got to adapt. The other, I think one of the small caveats to one of the things that Cris said is also because it's FileMaker and so malleable. I think a lot of other platforms that you would have started with 20 years ago, there's probably a higher propensity to toss that out and start with something newer and cleaner. Where FileMaker, you go, no, we can graft, we can bend, we can mold on top of some of the legacy equity that we built. What are some of the biggest right angles you've seen from a business starting from point A and wants to go to point C, and you've got to get them there? What are some of the decisions that go into that?
Scale is definitely, I mean, just to echo what Cris said, scale is a huge one, for sure. One that we've come across recently, and actually two examples that I can think of, were actually about change of ownership within the organization or change of leadership, and a need for righting the wrongs, right? Like, hey, it just feels old, or hey, I'm stepping in and I want this to feel like it's got my thumbprint on it. So sometimes it's a UI refresh, right? So
no, I literally, like, I'm imagining like several of those exact scenarios where we purposely go, let's clean up these layouts and not these other ones, so
look,
that
it's new, right?
These are us and those are the previous.
Yeah.
It's such a great tactic.
And we actually started using this term because we inherited a system from a developer who retired that was massive and old. You know it, right? It's a redwood in the terms of it's got a lot of rings and it's really tall. And ultimately, we went in there gung ho, like, oh yeah, this is one of those, it's going to need a rebuild. Like all the instances of the reasons we were going to need a rebuild were there. But then we actually met with the customer. We met with their web team. We started peeling back all the layers, and we realized, this is not, it's almost impossible to rebuild financially, right? Which is a whole other thing we should talk about, is that I think
we're headed there. Yeah.
Within the past few years, right? The willingness for organizations to invest in a rebuild, time and money, is just flattened out for us. So
Agreed.
Out of this particular engagement talking about, we came up with this concept of rebuild in place, right? And it's kind of like what you always do in FileMaker. You're just changing it. You're just changing it. Whether you're changing 90% of it or 9% of it, you're changing it, right? So we, with this customer, ended up with, you're cruising on the highway. We're going to change the rear wheels while the front wheels, and some ballast are keeping the car going in in that direction. So that's I mean, I know I'm not directly answering the question, but I think there's some kind of impetus that comes from leadership that we see more often these days that directly demands, like, we need something new. We need a refresh, right? Something like that. And also, one other thing I'll add along the same line to back that up is that, our platform is getting older, but the user base that is coming in is sometimes younger than the platform. And they have a whole other set of expectations and experiences with apps and with software, right? So they come in, and how many times have you heard, a not gray-haired member of a team of one of your clients say, why does this thing work this way? It doesn't make any sense, right? So some of those are some of the softer things that are driving some of the reason we make these decisions these days.
To that very point, I think isn't there a really interesting risk that then might reveal itself when in a scenario like let's say, building on what you're saying, they've got a FileMaker system. I love the storyline of there's new leadership and they want something different or whatever. And let's say there's also influence emerging from the user base of younger perspectives, we'll just call it, for lack of a different way to define it. Aren't we then in theory presenting greater risk to move off of FileMaker platform completely by actually introducing a rebuild? And then are we being disingenuous to the customer if we're using that as an evaluation variable?
Sure. on the nose, right? I mean, that's so often these days when, I mean, maybe it's a subtext to this entire conversation is this refactor, renovate, rebuild, is that, you know, reconsider is maybe the other thing that
Oh,
people
wow. Nailed
in
it.
this particular place, right? They
Right.
reconsider and yeah, so now we're selling a whole other thing, right? In addition, again, I would say under the guise of that evaluation phase we're having with new customers with existing systems is we're willing to say, hey, is there part of this that can be peeled off and we could use HubSpot for your CRM needs? Or is there something we could peel off here and put in another platform, right? And reinvest, and let's face it, reinvest, step back and be consultants and use the FileMaker platform for what it's best for, which sometimes isn't everything.
It's funny, I happened to see their AWS is having an Innovate conference, and their tagline is migrate, modernize, build. And I was like, it's just a slightly different way of saying what we're talking about today, right? So, you know, Chris, you mentioned something. There's a really good word that you mentioned in there that underlies all of this is the word risk. You know, any strategy has pros, cons, right? Any strategy has risk, rewards. And so when you talk about risk, it's something that you go, okay, well, yes, you have this existing legacy system. We're going to replace it all. We're going to throw it all out. It's going to cost 4 times what you thought some of the repair work was. And now it's on you, right? So, and if you don't, I mean, we had one customer a few years ago where real cantankerous boss, the developer died before us. And we were inheriting code and we didn't have a lot of the legacy stuff, and we sat down and wanted to go, let's get a sense of who you are, and then we can make some. And it was no, fix this, fix this, fix this. And then 3 or 4 years later, you know, we kept trying to raise our hand and go, hey, you know, we see kind of where the train is going and there's a cliff ahead. So in that respect, they got upset with us for going, hey, how come you didn't tell us? And I go, we were trying to multiple times. So the risk of not having that conversation is also as bad as having a conversation and picking perhaps the wrong strategy.
Yeah, well said.
Yeah, especially if that's happening, especially if the sales cycle is still fresh, like the paint hasn't dried yet on the engagement. And then you're all of a sudden, you're getting in there and you're like, oh my God, you've been running this system for how long? And you're storing social security numbers and you have a guest account on there are some things that are just stop everything. And like, wait, now that you've exposed us to this, we have the responsibility to close this door. Because we can't just, you know, it's like a cop pulling somebody over who they think's drunk. They have to take them away. They can't just let them go because now they're culpable in that as well too. So I sort of feel like there are a lot of scenarios with risk where just getting exposed to a new system, all of a sudden you're like, okay, well, if this thing blows up, now I'm part of this, you know.
Yeah, it's well said.
Yeah, you know, I think a lot of us hear the metaphor, the good, fast, cheap, right? You know, the triangle, you pick 2, you can't have 3, et cetera. But Adam was mentioning, you know, we could spend a day talking about budgets. That always, you know, of course, and sometimes more than we as developers, we want to think about the ethereal, the beautiful system. A year from now, you're going to be in this system. It's going to be lovely. It's going to do all these great things. But at the end of the day, the reality is costs enter the factor. Where and how do you handle that, Adam, in terms of, you know, getting to that, identifying it, and then working within it?
So let me make sure I understand the question correctly. You're talking about scoping whichever option that we're going through.
Yeah, I mean, a customer, you know, let's just say we've done what you and Chris say. We've invested our time in learning who you are, what you have, and so forth. We have a prescription or potential options. I generally try to come with 2 or 3 options and go, we can do this, we can do this, we can do this. Those all come with pros and cons, and the budget is one of those things. Customer has budget ideas or thinks they have budget ideas. Sometimes they don't, but budget becomes an issue, and we have to talk about that with them. And it does factor into whether we're going to do some light fixes, some more significant modifications, or toss everything out and start with a clean sheet.
So all the more reason to take the approach that I recommended earlier, which is like, you know, a 3 to 6 month dating period, right? Let's get to know how bad this house is. Let's get to know how bad the foundation is. Let's know where all the you know, where everything is broken. Because not only does that give us the knowledge right? The systemic knowledge of what the technical debt is, but it also allows us to have a benchmark that we could use to then frame a financial conversation, right? Hey, you've been spending $8,000 a month for the past 3 months with us, and our backlog is still X deep. If we're going to, continue this kind of rebuild in place, we've got to adjust these calculations based on this. But it also allows us to say, hey, what's the long-term opportunity here for Fullcity? Maybe we want to dial the rate back, right? And then we can kind of sweeten the deal for the customer, right? And say, hey, we know we're going to be here for 5 years. Let's let's absorb X. So again, that 3 to 6 month dating period, whatever it is, 2 weeks, it gives you the ability to have that. It gives you information from which you can have that conversation. It reminds me, it's no different than entering a customer who's net new, right? Greenfield, and says, how much is this whole thing going to cost me? Well, I don't know enough yet. Let me spend some time to get to know what I need to know.
Yeah, and your point about, removing or lowering those barriers initially, so you get in the room with them, get their trust. Any good drug dealer will tell you, right?
Right, get hooked.
Yeah. So, Chris, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, to me, and I want to give you some kudos here, Dave, because to me, that conversation is all about ROI, and the kudos I want to give you is you are one of the voices that I credit for tying ROI into. I've heard you talking about that before I heard anyone else in the community really talking about that, and I think a lot of ROI discussions come in we're building something from scratch. And so what's the ROI? You want to take these kind of industrial engineering use cases where you're like, well, this person does this many times and therefore da 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 da. I think it's even more critical to take that approach when you're talking about these rebuild things. Like, because you would assume there's cost sensitivity because they've already made an investment in the first place. And they've either realized or not realized the return on that investment already. So that's, again, that another elephant in the room. This is a big room now with a lot of elephants in it, apparently. But then when you're talking about just the modifications, or I think what presents itself is this interesting ROI or the reverse. What would be the reverse of ROI? A risk of investment?
Opportunity cost, right?
Yeah, there it is. There we go. That's what I'm looking for. The opportunity. We kind of get into technical debt now. Like, if you keep going down this path, these are some of the costs and negative impacts that you're going to see. I think that becomes so important at that stage of evaluation. Then
we're working on we're closing a pretty good sized project right now. And to that point, Chris, that opportunity cost, we can sit there and say, X number of users, and we shave, 5 minutes a day off this manual thing they do. And at the average salary, it turns into this, and over 12 months, system will pay for itself in X. That's the ROI component. This particular customer, it's moving forward. It's just a little bit glacial. And I basically ran some back of the napkin numbers and said, this is costing you guys about 90 grand a month that you don't have this system in place, right? So wouldn't that be nice to get, a handle on? So yeah, the other thing I'll share with you folks, Chris, thank you for the props on ROI. It is something that we used to always do. I will tell you, really has changed. Some of what we've seen in the workplace after COVID. The boss is not boss, the employees are boss, and it's a buyer's market and all of that sort of stuff. One of the repercussions of that we have absolutely noticed is, especially when meeting with younger people who, when you're our age, everybody is, right? So when you're meeting with younger people and you start doing that ROI thing, the old bean counters are like, yes, let's do it. We're going to save money. The thing that seems to resonate a lot with the younger users is you're going to go home earlier. You're going to have a higher quality of life. You get to spend more time with your kids as opposed to in this system that you guys are struggling with right now. Has blown me away how that quality of life conversation has rocketed up and been not on equal footing with ROI, but has been a real strong component of the conversation.
Interesting. Yeah, that's interesting. And wow, yeah, I don't want to say out loud, I haven't even considered that, but I hadn't thought about how important that is to this phase of the conversation with potential rebuild customers too. That's really interesting. Yeah, because I used to call those ta-da feature, I would actually focus on a feature, and what it would be is during discovery, you figure out who the Zeds are, right? So-and-so over here does not want this thing rebuilt at all. So they're like, when we try to deploy this, they're not even going to use it. We're going to get all the pushback from them. So at a real micro level, I'd always like sort of focus on them and go, okay, what's their pain? What's their quality of life pain point? Oh, I happen to find out that they do this like, report that takes 3 weeks at the end of every year. And then we'll just go, stakeholder or not, hey, can we focus on that and build that in? Because I want to pull that person in. And I think that's what you're saying. It's like a quality of life gift you're giving back to a user, whether you're pulling them back in or you're selling an approach on a system. Either way, that's an excellent tactic. And then I think, an honest and genuine, like, we want to make this be something that you're happy about, and people will immediately become invested in the success of the system and whatever approach you're suggesting at that point.
Yeah, one of our a really fantastic story. One of our customers, going back dozens of years, woman named Jean, and she had to hand enter reports into the system. And we were building her a new system, and it was clocking in at about 20 grand. And we said, hey, by the way, I noticed that you're doing all this hand entry, and we can probably slurp those spreadsheets in for you. It's going to be a little, probably another 10 grand to do that. She's like, all right, do it. We get further in, and we find a couple of other wrinkles, a couple of other efficiencies we can gain, and we go, look, it's probably another 10 grand for that. She's like, all right. So it's 3 or 4 months after we go live, and I call her up and we're talking about stuff, and I go, Gene, you guys have been using the new system for a while. I said, you guys were going to talk about 20 grand. You doubled the cost of this thing. She said, David, I get to go home at 5 o'clock instead of 7 o'clock. I get to walk my dogs on the beach every night. I would have paid twice as much. Yeah. Like that kind of, it has nothing to do with bean counters or whatever. That's, relatively small business, and the owner gets to spend time with her dogs. And you're like, that's the story. That it's hard to convey that when you're talking with a new customer. Hey, you got this legacy system. If we toss this out, or we do this level of integration or whatever, we're going to make you go home early. That's hard for them to believe. But
the only time I ever had a customer hand me a check was a situation like that, right? Where it was a small business owner, avid sportsman, end of his season, he's got to go in, into Excel and start building a report. And sure enough, we start talking about making it 1 click. Oh, so I'll get all those days back that I can go out and hunting and, being out in the, absolutely. Here's a check.
Chris Moyer it's funny. He's, I want to hear from Chris on anything he ever wants to say, because he's a brilliant guy. He talks about the effectiveness of low hanging fruit. I have a story that I use with customers because it's kind of fun, but it's also poignant. Jerry Seinfeld. He does this bit where he says, you walk into the drugstore, you're looking for painkiller. And he goes, and over here, you got fast acting. And over here, you got long lasting. And you have to ask yourself, do I want to feel better now or later? Right? And when I'm talking with a customer and they got a legacy system, I go, look, I can make you feel really good right now. The sugar rush is, let's get you that report you need. But I also see that you want to integrate with the web or integrate with QuickBooks or other long-term things, and that's not going to work. So you're going to have to go without pain relief for a while, but oh my God, are you going to feel better later? That's such a hard seesaw to put them on, right?
All the more reason to say, hey, let's take 3 months to get to know your system and patch up. We'll spackle up whatever's broken before we decide if we're tearing down the wall.
Yeah, to do a little bit of both, right?
Yeah,
perhaps exactly. let's get some, and I think that's one of the things. Chris, do you get one of those where you go, I think we're going to build a new system. Short term, they want a couple of tweaks on UI or export or something like that. And you go, yeah, we can do that. Or even when you're in the middle of building a system, you go, I'm working on a new system, they're on the legacy, and you have to draw a line before you go, look, I don't want to spend, I don't want to spend 200 hours on this short-term fix that we're going to toss away when you guys end up in that new system.
You have to, I mean, it's imperative. Like, you have to just chime in the second that you recognize one of those things coming. And I think that's a good transition into the second half of the discussion, which I think is the technical part, right?
Yeah.
And so I think what you're, the first thought bubble that pops into my head and influenced by what you're saying there is, I think if we're all really good at what we're doing, we are taking what is referred to as like a first principles approach. And there's this really interesting thing that happens where you guys have all experienced this. You'll get 2 kinds of customers. Well, you'll often get this one type of customer, and that's the customer that goes, Oh, well, have you ever built a system for a financial services company that does crypto overseas in the, or, you know, in the country of Guam? And then you're like, no. And they're like, well, what we do over here is very special. And then you go, well, but what we're bringing is the ability to become subject matter experts and understand these things. And then the value is that objectivity, right? So, and I believe that I like, that's a religion, you know, for me. And I think everybody in this, you know, who's on this call or in this meeting. And so the challenge there is if we're true, and then so that objectivity is like this magic wand where you can literally, you get the power to be able to say, well, why are you doing that, right? And the why are you doing that, or why have you been doing that over and over and over again for the last 15 years is really a first principles like perspective on it, right? The challenge though is we're looking at things technically. The challenge though is, I mean, it's almost impossible to think first principles and not think rebuild at the same time too, right? So that I think is what probably one of the biggest factors working against us might be actually from when we're looking at like what you, and then when you're doing this evaluation of what you want to do. I would add one interesting thing to that. I often tell people, not customers or anything, but just when I'm just talking about FileMaker, and I wonder if everybody feels the same way about this. Selling FileMaker, and this definitely goes back to the technical and the goals of it, the thing that you just brought up. Selling FileMaker in the year 2000 was you go into an organization, you go, tell us all the ways you do data, where you manage your data. We're going to handle all of it in FileMaker, right? Sans, maybe say for like an accounting system. That was the only thing that was off base.
But it's edge to edge.
Yeah, everything else is like, give me all your data, we're going to do it. Well, now fast forward to 2024. I mean, our approach is completely different. If we have one of those, the good fortune of a from scratch opportunity, now it's totally different. Now you go in and you take inventory of all the stuff that's working. What are all the apps you're using? And then we like to say the app gaps, like, you know, fill in. Now we're going to use this custom solution to fill in the gaps on all the things the other applications aren't doing. So that's a benefit, and that conversation works when you're starting from scratch. But when you're like the situation you're proposing, where it's like, well, in the future we want to integrate with this, and we probably want to do a web thing, and then we want to go mobile, da 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 da. Now you're like, oh man, you know, this maybe shouldn't be the system of record for this piece, and so on and so on. So it gets a lot harder to not do rebuild, I think, in those cases.
Yeah, Adam mentioned HubSpot. You can rebuild HubSpot and replicate that. And it's going to take you this much time and this much cost, and it's still going to have limitations. I could build the equivalent of MailChimp in FileMaker. Why would I? Right? So yeah, if you've got yourself surrounded with good industry standard pieces like that, that's the other part, the egotistical aspect, Chris, of we're going to build you everything.
I know.
I got this.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
To your point, except for the accounting, guess what? There's a lot of really stupid accounting systems in FileMaker that we've all seen, right? That somebody put together and built or hacked. One of the other questions, I want to get into the technical stuff. One of the other questions, you know, when you always talk about good, fast, and cheap, right? So we're talking about quality, we're talking about cost. The time is also one of those things. So, you know, it was funny, as I was putting together bullet points for this, one of the interesting things that we share, Chris, you historically worked with people like the Academy Awards. We've worked with the Emmy Awards. Guess what? You're not doing anything on the system during award season. You're like, no. We've got this window of time where we're going to be, you know, just going nuts. If you're working with a school, guess what? We've got all summer to get these IT projects done, and then, you know, et cetera. So what are some of the timeline issues? I mean, how does that impact your decision making when you're working with a client that's got that sort of window of opportunity?
Well, seasonal, I mean, anything that's
Adam, isn't that a perfect opportunity for the dating period that you're talking about? Like, let's just wait till summer.
Yes, exactly. And that's the other, when I was saying earlier about the customer that we stepped into, we decided it was just too big. They do aftercare for schools in Virginia. They're like a huge, thousands of kids going to aftercare programs, and they don't have a slow season, right? They're like, oh, you know, maybe like 3 weeks in November. And we were talking to them in October, right? And we're like, all right, so we're going to spend a lot of time getting to know you. For sure. Yeah. So that's one aspect of it. While we're on the subject of time, I want to throw something out here, which is that I also believe, maybe you guys have seen this as well. is that the only thing people seemingly have less of than money right now is time, right? So that whole concept, what in a rebuild, part of the conversation that I think you owe it to your customers to have with them is retraining, right? Is, hey, we're going to have to show you how the new system works, right? Even if they're participating in the sprints and the code reviews and UAT and all that, they're still going to have to see and learn how to use the new system. And a couple of times that's been a showstopper for us.
Yeah.
More so than the money.
I have to say on that point, the adoption app, right? You spent all this time, you spent all this money, you've verified and tested. Well, if you found somebody doing UAT, well, Adam, let me know, because that's also
You get a customer.
God. Yeah.
Right.
But I just gotta say, it is invaluable, and it's so much harder to do in the way of Zoom these days. But man, oh man, the day we go live, we're parking a developer on site, just chipping away. I'm sitting there, I'm here, I'm available.
Hypercare.
Like, oh my God, just having somebody parked on site when the cover comes off of it for a day or two can really be a big lift of both just care and feeding, right? I'm here, I can, we tweaked or we missed something, but also let you know I'm standing right next to you, I know how to help you. Super helpful.
Yeah, I think time's probably the biggest deal. I'm gonna +1 that by just saying, because here's a huge risk. You feel like you have a fish on the hook for the right thing to do, and that's rebuild. And then you have that very difficult conversation about how long this is going to take. And the variable that you guys just mentioned that sometimes doesn't come up in that conversation. You're just talking about build time, but then the ramp up time or the transition or the training and getting people up to the same level of efficiency with the new system, even if you're realizing your ROI gains, it's real time that extends that entire process. And here's where the risk, I think, comes from. Then, like, we on our side as the developers, and all of us in this group here, we might be tempted to try to say, well, shoot, it's in the back of your mind it's probably 9 months, but then you go, well, we could get you there by 6, and then you just start this whole process of massive risk towards expectation, disappointment, or really just not being able to hit timelines, or really just not being able to do the thing you want to do and accelerating it too much and then missing out on all the benefits. To me, that's probably the biggest risk when it comes to time, is the temptation to try to accelerate when like 2 pounds won't fit into a 1 pound bag, no matter how fast you try to go, basically.
Right.
Yeah, it's true. It's very, very true. When we get into the technical aspects, so you sit there and you go, they've got time, they've got budget, they've got buy-in, and now we've got, well, actually, I want to back up just a step. One other thing on Adam's point about training. If you happen to pick, hey, we've got a legacy system, there's some good here, we got to blow out these repeating fields and put in a proper, relational model, whatever that is, right? We can do that, we can get you there. And to your point, Chris, about the adoption and the training, if you're doing that remodel thing, and even if you're using Adam's model, which we do as well at times, where you're kind of live development, you're on the hood of the car while you're driving down the freeway and making improvements. Even when you're doing that, if you're in that remodel phase, there's almost a repetitious, hey, we've got that new module in place, let me train you on that. Now we've got these 3 new reports, let me train you on that. Some organizations do well with that incrementalism of slow adoption of new improvements and modernization of a legacy.
I would say most do.
Most do. That's probably fair. Pulling the chair out and putting the new thing in, oh my gosh, everything is different. And that's where it becomes a much bigger challenge, right?
I actually often say, speaking to that exact point, I'll say in some conversations with customers, like, hey, look, it's sort of like kind of when you're promoting like a more MVP approach instead of like the whole build out all at once. I will often say, look, even if you came to us and said you had $1 million and you just want to pay expedite fees and you want to do the whole 9 yards, I'm telling you that we can only do so much before we have to start training users, and we're going to experience some friction there. So you might as well just narrow the scope anyways, because you have to take into account how much people are going to learn. If you pull the chair out and put the new chair in, you've just And like, that's the first time people are seeing it, no matter how good your training is or how integrated it is and how well you've met their needs. It's like a whole massive thing. So to me, it's like, think about the amount of build, cost, time, and training. And if you can, to do bite-sized versions of those in an iterative fashion, you're winning.
Yeah. I think there comes a point where you deliver something so big that all the success is completely eclipsed by all of the, not failure, but the new learnings that appear to be failure. But they're really like, oh, we didn't realize this because this person never did this in this way. Right. So yeah, we shy away from the big rollout. There are no big rollouts. That's expectation disaster.
It's almost impossible to meet expectations that way, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, again, it's just so overwhelming in that respect. I think, both it can be fiscally, it can be from a development team standpoint, it can be from the receiving end and the training and the adoption. We always try to strive for that MVP. What's the minimum viable product that we can get our foot in the door, get some absorption of their culture and their ways of working and make some improvements, and then slowly do that weight transfer from the bad foot onto the good foot, right? So, but on occasion, we've got a full legacy ERP, crazy old FileMaker system. We need to throw this thing out, and every once in a while, man, we hate it when that happens, but every once in a while we're forced to do it, and we got to really get management buy-in and go, we're going to have videos and training, and we're going to have to really do the deep carpet approach to the deployment on that to make sure that we get good adoption.
I have a question actually for everybody really, and that is on, I guess I'll combine together like a naming convention, framework or approach, and how that might differ from your development team's approach, right? So like, to me, that is the hardest thing to deal with. So like, let's say we're in one of these scenarios we've been talking about where, God forbid, the other developer dies or whatever it is, new leadership has different relationships, whatever, and you just get handed, here you go, here's the thing that we want you to evaluate, rebuild, or, or how can we use this as scaffolding to build on top of or whatever. And then you peek under the hood and you go, oh, that approach or whatever it is.
Model.
Yeah, I was going to actually obfuscate that. I'm sorry. I was going to say, like, we actually had a new dev who came on and like, if we like first build into a project, project manager comes and goes, hey man, they're doing actually not, I have another one. They're doing this other technique, and we've done this technique before, and we know it's going to kill us in the future. So what do we do there, right? And I go, okay, well, stop everything. I want to talk to him. And so what I did was I said, and I'll try to keep this particular anecdote on topic, but I said, so why is it that you're doing this particular approach? Let's talk on Monday about why you're doing this particular approach. I look forward to it. I'm open-minded. I want to hear about it. I want to hear what this is. But when I showed up for the meeting, I go, okay, let's talk about how this is a benefit to the client.
Yes.
And literally and I was like so proud of myself because like it was disarming, and it was like, well, it saves them time. Well, we already did the bid. What do you mean it saves them time? Okay, throw that one out. But does it though, really? Because once you do this, then you got to do this in the end, and it's kind of like backing into a parking space. Like, yeah, it saves you moving out, but it took you more time to back in. Like, to me, those things, looking at then when you see a framework and you just go, oh, this was potentially all something that just benefited the previous development team. Now how do I explain to the user that we have to learn all this and ramp up and maybe pull some wires out? Like, how do you even explain? I literally am looking for advice. How do you even explain that to a client that that's a thing?
Yeah, we describe it to a customer as just, there's friction, right, between going from one style to another. I recently said to a customer, your first edition of Beowulf is written in Old English, and we don't know how to speak Old English. You're asking us to edit it in our version of English, and that, they kind of got the point there.
Well, and then how do you do that and not be like, hey, we're not as smart as the last guy because they knew Old English or something? You know what I mean? Like that whole weird
stylistic. It's stylistic.
Okay, yeah, I think that's it, right?
This is the only example I brought. Chris was mentioning this as we were kind of getting our heads around this topic. And we inherited a system, a couple of systems, where this is the field naming. Every single script has cryptic and with a number on it. And if he
Stop the madness.
Pardon me? What'd you say?
I said, I want to get up on a mountaintop and scream to every FileMaker developer in the world, stop the madness.
Yeah.
Stop the madness.
So we literally did the mechanics. We're like, well, we've got this existing system, we can't do this. And we opened up one of our systems and go, this is called first name. And if you want to export that, you want to do an export. Now let's find the equivalent over here. And we said, now let's talk about how we're going to wire up all your reports. And it became this coefficient of like 4x of development costs. And they had significant changes they wanted to make. So you're just like, again, do you want to feel better now or later? Because boy, this is going to be a much heavier lift if we have to keep this style in place. Adam and Cris, you guys both talked about scalability, which is absolutely a key component. One of the things that I get, and I want to give some examples of that, but one of the things that I get as a determinant are whether we have to rip out a significant part or whether we rebuild the data model, the cardinality. Do we have I need this stuff in an atomic level that's going to let me integrate with QuickBooks, or it's going to let me produce the reports that management needs, or show the dashboards, or any of that sort of stuff. That to me factors in heavily with, that to me needs to be done right, regardless of whether you're building in FileMaker or something else, right? Because if you don't get that right, doesn't matter whether you're using bricks or stone or wood to build with, it's going to be a bad floor plan.
Can I share an anecdote from my class? Sorry, Adam. I have to share. This is the story I tell in every single training class I've ever done when we're talking about relationships, specifically on the topic of many-to-many. I talk about this poor soul who this was a real person who took a class of mine many moons ago. And I get to the many-to-many discussion, right? And I present many-to-many as these are all the failure points that you will eventually encounter, don't even move forward at your own peril. Like, it's just not going to work. Right. So, this is a low hanging fruit example, but I think this expresses what you're saying here. And so someone raised their hand, after I go through my whole spiel about join tables and the whole deal, somebody raises their hand and they say, well, I think it's fair to say that, you can still build on top of these things, right? Like, FileMaker doesn't prohibit you from doing this, right? And so I go, well, I guess, yeah, there's no alert that pops up, but, this is, it's more than just a rule of thumb. I kid you not. Then at that lunch break, that same individual came to me and goes, hey, this is good so far. I really like it. At some point, can you help me? Here's my list of things that my boss sent me to fix on our system that we cannot figure out for the life of us. And I'm telling you guys, every single one of them was because they were not, they weren't normalized and they weren't using join table. And I did everything I could to just be like, well, it's that thing we just talked about. Like, so sort of like if you kind of mushroom cloud that up into a bigger system, I think that's a really important part of all this part, right? The data model.
Yeah. Adam, thoughts?
No, everything, that's a great example. And data model is a big one. And I think that also opens up the conversation with the customer of, there's nothing stopping us from extending what was already built in a not optimized manner, or we could take 2 steps back, which is going to cost you 2 steps worth of money, and then take 10 forward to get basically to a place that you're just going to keep. It's funny. It's that conversation about the re-envisioning technically what's there in a way that's more extendable is a kind of a microcosm of the whole conversation of rebuild, renovate, right? It's like, hey, do we want to do this the simple way, the inexpensive way, just the duct tape way, or do we want to kind of tear the porch out and build a new porch, right? Because we could just keep extending, but we're just technical debt, right? You're gonna pay for it. And I use the word friction a lot in these conversations. And that's a great place where, yeah, we could do it the cheap way, but we're just building up more friction and more friction and more friction. Eventually, we're going to get to where we're going to have to say to you, now we got to go back to where we told you we should be 8 months ago, because we didn't do it right back then. You weren't budgeting for us to do it right in the first place.
Yeah. Again, you want to feel better now or later, right? And that's it's hard. It's hard we know we're the scouts. We can see down the trail. We know how to get you to Oregon from St. Louis, right? We know how to do that. And you don't see that, you don't trust it. And again, getting some of that trust early can help there. But there are times when you, as the consultant, go, oh my gosh, I have it in my head now. Now that I've been dancing with them, I've seen their things. I have the vision of what the perfect system is, and I got to try to get that across to them. And it might be in multiple steps or what have you, but it's challenging. One of the things you talk about scalability, and it's a small little wrinkle on that scalability. I think we generally think about growth size, the volume of the data, the number of users, the number of transactions, the connections. Those are the things I think we all feel. One of the other subtle things that we just came across, again, another one of those customers that says, oh yeah, we run these events and every year we create a new copy of the file, right?
Yeah,
So there's that one. And the thing that I'm getting with, even with customers who we're inheriting systems from, I'm looking at the long play right here and I'm going, look, there's more and more opportunities to get your stuff to the cloud. And at some point in the time, I don't know, maybe on-prem goes away, I don't know. But I know it's costly to continue to have more files, let alone the security and the, managing and tightening all the ropes around all of these different files. But I'm generally trying, when it makes technical sense to do so, to try to get that file count down lower, because you can use the more affordable version of cloud if you want to just have 3 files and et cetera, et cetera. So what do you guys think about that? Do you guys think about files and that level of scalability?
For sure. As a matter of fact, you were talking about the aforementioned Oscars. When we landed there, they had a new FileMaker file for every Oscar season. It was like, oh man. And it took us like a legit few years to be able to just kind of rebuild on top of that. And a lot of it had to do with the small window of seasonality that we had to work with. And it was just like, well, let's just fix this thing. I think the thing that actually, when it comes to like that level of normalization, the way that you win people over is you just go, hey, did you realize that you can have access to your historical data? We're assuming they're not linking file to file, but the fact that you go, yeah, let's make all these, put this all in a join table. And now think of the reporting you can do and the intelligence that you have at this, at this level. Those are the types of things that I think really get people thinking differently. And figure out what that cost benefit analysis towards the rebuild might be.
The code proliferation, all of the security that needs to follow each file, all of the graph replication, so there's
we consult for an in-house developer who has kind of shielded, he's like used us as his little army and doesn't really expose us to the organization. And over the years he creates a new FileMaker file for every new job because they're going to be on site with an iPad, they're out in the desert, there's no Wi-Fi, but this is the right way to do it. And that went on for years, and us telling him, there's better way. I know, but I can. And sure enough, a new leadership comes in and new IT leadership comes in and goes, well, that's that FileMaker. That's a crazy way of doing that. FileMaker can't build out a fully normalized system. And that was the end of that in-house development.
Great call.
Right.
Oops.
So that for sure.
When we the other thing, I just showed you guys some bad coding, in terms of naming conventions. We also stumble across a lot of fragility,
brittleness,
hard coding, not using variables, not using methods that are going to expand and so forth. Security. What are some of the other technical things where you go, wow, like maybe the data model is fine and this thing looks like we could remodel parts of it, but all of a sudden it gets tossed out because of, oh my gosh, we're going to have 45 layouts that have to be reskinned, and that's going to be faster if we do it in a new file. Or what are the things that you throw caution to the wind in terms of where you land on one of those 3 options? Let's just clean this thing up with some UI, or let me replace some of this hard coding with traditional.
Just because of our deep bench of data people and data and analytics, anything that has to do with, when I open up and see the, invoices 2004, invoices 2003, invoices 2002 fields, right? in the customer table, that kind of thing, right? So there are times where we say, you know, rather than keep this, this is something we're just gonna scrap and rebuild, because there are also newer, better ways to do reporting and data visualization that don't necessarily, again, like the HubSpot example, don't need the FileMaker platform. So let's re-envision that. So that's one place. Any kind of financial analysis, we'll just say, oh yeah, let's not even bother. Let's just jump right ahead.
I
Put
think
it
there's a
behind.
really interesting, I guess, how would I frame it up as a pain point within the FileMaker platform. When you talk about reskinning or UI, let's be honest with ourselves that the right way to do it is to apply themes and styles, right? And that's how you can do the least amount of work and propagate it over the most amount of layouts. But the reality is that only works on a from scratch project. When you inherit something,
It's a great one.
it's almost it's impossible at that point to go
Yeah.
back and to do that. So to me, I find that to be kind of frustrating, honestly, because you know you want to do right by them, and you know the same conundrum happened in web back before CSS was introduced into web, and it was like, well, I got to go touch every one of these pages to do this. Well, that seems ridiculous and dated, but my God, it's like the same kind of thing we have within our tool set right now within the FileMaker platform, you know?
Right. How about just avoiding the conversation about phones altogether, right? Like phone, no, you don't want that. You don't want to use it.
Yeah, you don't want it at all.
You're not really going to do that.
Yeah, so I don't know. To me, a lot of times the answer is reskin, because your schema and your infrastructure might be okay, but this user experience is what's dated, or this fit where you were 8 years ago, and it just doesn't fit where you are, where your people are right now anymore. But it would be great if that was easier, I guess, is the whole point from a tool set standpoint.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
that comes to mind is we're in the midst of redoing a project. I'm sure you've all seen it, like rings on a tree, right? You see the FileMaker file where most of there's a bunch of things in the upper left-hand corner of the screen that fit in a little box. And then all of a sudden there's like rings of data of fields, right? As you go out towards the lower right-hand corner, and you're like, oh, this must have been built in version 8. And there was done in 13. So yeah, we have a customer who came to us and said, I want to, who had a system that's actually been a FileMaker customer for 30 years, one of the longest that I've heard of, and had that situation and said, great, I need to get rid of everything that's like beyond this ring, but I want to keep everything else, just make it look more modern, because I can't, every time I interview somebody for this position, I have a feeling they're running away because they're like, oh my God, I can't do this job. Right, getting back to quality of life, right? Like I can't work with this.
When it comes to UI, one of the approaches, Adam was talking about working on a live system and so forth. And again, we've had a number of customers. We work with a customer formerly that Lynn Allen was working with, and Lynn built the backbone of this thing, and so it's got insanely good cardinality, and the data model is fantastic. But it was built back in the day where a folder tab is a new layout, right? And that's because it's been around for so many years and so forth. So there are opportunities when we have that where we go, oh my God, the data model is good, and the cardinality and the processes and workflows. And to use Adam's metaphor of, we want to, instead of we're sitting on top of the car with you, we're on the trailer connected to the back of the car, and we're building a new, maybe we have one new UI file, and it's going to point to all the sensible data models in the back, but we can slowly, not only are we using live data, but we're also letting them A, B, and C before and after and all of that sort of stuff. So it can be an approach. It's still a little labor intensive, and you have to be careful, but it's an approach you can use where if you go, man, there's good data here, and we all struggle with data migration, right? Getting everything moved over perfectly. But if the data model has got some good premises to it, you can strap a nice little cover on top of that and get away with it. And the only other thing I'd say about the UI, we did a new UI on one of our favorite customers a couple of years ago. And to the customer, the UI is the application, right? To them, you go, oh my God, we've already got all your data, your history, your legacy, it's all here. We've got all that technical equity that we're using. Your existing system really is the prototype for where you are today, and this is what we're going to do. So we're going to make bigger screens and brighter and appeal to those younger users that are coming in from using apps and things of that nature. But it can, I used to always wince at a big price tag on a UI reskinning job if it turns into like, wow, we're touching 90 screens and all this stuff. To the end user, they're like, oh my God, this is insanely better. And you're going, it's the same shit. And they're like, no, it's not. And they're right.
You're right. Yep.
Yep.
What about, I mean, some of the other things too, one of the things that we struggle with, and I think everybody who's a FileMaker developer, so many of our customers, they're working from home, they're working remote. We've got multiple locations and so forth. So you have sort of, I've got to open 35 files, or I got to open one file. What are the things that you guys give thought to with respect to WAN access, performance over the net? Maybe I'm accessing things via the web, via mobile devices and so forth. What are the considerations?
We're old enough to remember when that didn't matter, right? Old enough to the pipe got smaller, strangely enough, right? All the technology infrastructure, right, stuff that like we're able to do so much more, but the pipe got smaller. Right. So yeah, we just ran into this. One of the rebuilds that we just scoped was about the fact that, yeah, the workforce moved remote. And what are we going to do with all those unstored calcs that are relying on unstored calcs and layouts with 16 unstored calcs? What are we going to do about all that? Well, we're not going to refactor all that. Well, yeah, we could, right? Pepper in PSOS and all that kind of stuff. But the reality is, no, it's been a long time and it's enough. It's enough of a justification to rebuild. I'm sorry, what were you going to say, Dave?
No, that's exactly the kind of thought process. Chris, you were talking about, for example, themes and styles. Those are going to render faster. That's going to be one of those little incremental barnacles on the side of the boat that keeps it from moving as quickly as it could, right? What are some of the other things that you consider when they're complaining about our application is slow?
Data storage. I mean, Adam mentioned it as well too. That's the biggest one. I would guess that as a community, during COVID, when everybody had to move their systems to the home, and I bet you the number one thing that users were discovering was when data was not stored, or unstored versus stored, and that the negative user experience that comes along with it. I would guess that was probably the number one with the bullet issue that people ran into when everybody went remote.
It was funny because we did a marketing campaign around there right on the heels of that. And second to that, we saw and felt the exact same thing, Chris. But second to that also would be there is no file cabinet, right? So all of a sudden, file storage for every single document now needed to be, we need DocuSign integration, or we need to have this integrated with Box.com or a mechanism, because I can't run this over to the boss for a signature. I can't go to the file cabinet anymore. It's all digitized. So we saw a huge influx of that as well.
Great point.
The other thing, Chris was talking about, working with that on-premise developer. I think we all have that. And part of it, I think, is endemic because this platform has been around forever, right? So a lot of large organizations go, yeah, we need to have somebody sitting on site who can, change the value list and crank out a report and so forth. And back in the day at Angel City, we used to be prima donnas. No. I tell the story. I used to work on cars when I was in college, and there was a sign on the wall, and it's $40 an hour for car repair, $50 an hour if you watch, and $60 if you help, right? So I tell that story because you go, oh my God, we're going to build this pristine Mona Lisa. The graph is going to be, lovely and all that. And next thing you know, I've got some knucklehead screwing around with our code and so forth. We used to just go, no, you're not going to want to do that, or we'll finish the system, hand it to you, and then all bets are off. We've moved pretty gradually over the years to go, no, we can have a nice working relationship with the developer. And that factors into, what some of the naming conventions or some of the architectural things. So if we can get in there and go, we can make this better by replacing this thing you did. You did a great little mock-up here, and this is useful, but we're going to come in and replace that one thing, and that's going to allow us to do this. But more from an ongoing standpoint, what do you have to do? What do you have to do to play nicely with somebody in the sandbox? Adam.
Not yet. This is so poignant because I'm having a conversation later today about this very with the customer about this very thing. So this customer came to us and said, we need more velocity. You sell us our licenses. We have an in-house developer. We need another developer. And we said, great, we'll give you that developer. But as we learned more about their system, we thought, you know, I said, well, here's an instance where you think that another developer is going to give you more velocity. 9 women can't make a baby in a month. So I think what we have to do is we have to take a step back and actually what's needed here, rather than me just saying X number of hours a month for a developer, we need the first thing is we need to get some FileMaker DevOps going here, right? We need to standardize your FileMaker DevOps, because the way you're doing it now with a guy answering the phone and making a change for a user in the live system, it ain't cutting it. And then for, you know, so that conversation started, and in the midst of the conversation, the in-house developer says, I said, you know, so send us a clone. And he said, I can't, because the clones won't open on the server. And I said, all right, so yeah, right. So, bold, everything I just said, bold. And that was all that, and he only knew that. The person, the decision maker, was on the phone with us, never heard that before. I translated him in English what that meant. And I said, yeah, we're putting a dev environment in, we're starting from scratch. So that's what comes to mind is, you know, is the typically the in-house developers, and I was one of them one day, so I'm not throwing anybody into the bus here. We've all done it.
They all suck.
What is DevOps? What is that, right? FileMaker has been the great enabler, right? You can do anything anyway. It doesn't mean you should, right? So if we're going to work with an in-house developer, let's first make sure we're on the same page. And by the way, we're tracking everything in Asana or Jira, or wherever your system du jour is, right? Best practice. System of center of excellence.
That's an ideal, no question. Two things pop to mind when I hear about the other developer. The first one is just speaking to what you were saying about the 9 mothers can't make a baby in a month. By the way, that's so great. I'm totally going to use that. But I think there is and I actually think this is a true statement because of the tool set and it just sort of legacy and the way it works. Whether it's the customer who has a belief that hiring you guys to embellish the work that their internal person's doing, or it's, and I'll admit, you know, we've been in these situations where they go, hey, you guys have another developer over there we could throw on this to double time? And then you have that awkward moment where you go, that's totally not a thing in FileMaker. Like there's all these like constraints and limitations to the platform that make it so that I really can't do that, right? And so that's an interesting kind of phenomenon. The other part, as far as, and Dave, I just want to like echo what you're saying about, you know, the gradual change towards like embracing them having somebody on site. We've done the same thing. Like it was very much before like, oh my God, no, please. I don't want to open this thing up when we're in the middle of a deployment and see another TO float around somewhere that you don't even know what the heck it's for.
Really pretty colors.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, you found the color palette. Sweet. But if we go all the way back to where we started our conversation, that tip of the spear, the top of the funnel on the pre-sales, we find that, and this ends up actually being a true statement. We find that when you're talking to the future customer or whatever it is, and you go, look, we want you to have somebody on staff that's taking ownership of these things. Yeah. And here's a reason why, one example of why. Well, because there's this huge fear when it comes to any contractor, whether it's the person redoing your kitchen or your deck or your FileMaker system. Lawyer billing is in the back of everybody's mind. The whole like they got to call you for every single thing is a proposition that is in everybody's mind when we're selling to them. So the one way to disarm that in a manner that is actually a true, very true thing is to go, we want you to pick somebody on your team to sit in the back of these meetings, peek behind the curtain as to what we're doing. And we don't want to charge you for every single pixel push once this thing is live. And the reality of it is that's true. Like when you really sit and do the back of the napkin math on somebody calling you to say, can you add this one field to that layout? And then you doing it. And then like at the end, there literally is a scenario where you lose money doing that, like the ins and outs of that whole thing. And so then if you think about, okay, well, if that's true, let's just assume what I'm saying is true on the lose money part, then you're also assuaging the concern about the lawyer billing thing, and then empowering somebody internally to essentially do some pixel push and some light lift for you, that if you get to do it at the beginning of the engagement, then you got sort of a mild DevOps training, like this is our style, this is our naming convention, this is how we do it. It's a quality of life improvement for everybody on both sides of the
Everybody.
You're also building in redundancy and
the sustainability of your app.
Yeah.
Right.
Absolutely.
Your use of FileMaker is going to be so much more successful if you have somebody who at least knows how to go in. The joke I say to customers all the time is you never go to the dentist for flossing. Yeah, they'll do it for you when you're there for a cleaning, right? But you don't go to the dentist, say, hey, can I call for my flossing appointment? At some point, some of this has got to be self-service, right?
So Adam and Dave, you know what? So Ryan McCann, has a vision in his mind of a champion, right?
Yeah.
What I just described, I think is a champion. Would you guys call that a champion? Like you have this person that's on the other side.
Can be the champion.
Yeah, and
it can be. I generally want that champion not to be the problem with that technical person being the champion is they're going to want to talk with you for 20 minutes about the app and geek out. And I want to talk about the business. I want to go, where are you guys going? How can we get you there? What are you struggling with? So from that standpoint, I'll take either one.
Ryan defines, just to bring everybody else into so Ryan defines the champion as someone who actually has access to the boss's office, right? Like they can actually go in and go, FileMaker's a good tool for that. So I agree. I think though, and I bring that up only because I think one of the values of onboarding somebody on their team is they could potentially become a champion for you as well. So
absolutely. We are getting close to our finish time here. I want to open it up to the rest of the group real quick and go, what are any other business concerns, any other technical concerns, or what are the big signs that fly out of your head when you go, oh, we can keep this and tweak it up, or we can throw this away and start new, or what are some of the other concerns? Tony, what do you got?
Hey, thanks. First off, terrific show. Thanks everybody for putting it on. I was playing along at home. For those who don't know, click the 3 dots on the lower right-hand corner. I dropped some links because I had more to say than the time available. So maybe I'll just leave it at that. Some of the topics that were touched upon, I'd addressed with blog posts like naming conventions involves renaming objects. Themes, we did it wrong, really stupid. And then we did it right, really smart. So I did a blog post on that. I did a podcast about technical debt. It was 5 episodes. First one, the entire motivation to do the podcast, FileMaker Fanatics, it's linked, 3 dots, click them, was to address what Cris mentioned about how do you communicate with a customer and say, hey, your system under the hoods, is garbage or has technical debt. And how do you, and this, I think, would be my closing ad, because I mostly agree with what people said, pretty much. So this is like, yes, and is one of the things we do, give us 10 hours. Give us a punch list of 10 things. We'll look at the 10 things. Maybe your top choice is 10 hours and it gives you 10 units of value. Maybe your second choice is 5 units and it gives us 1. I think I flipped the numbers. We'll pick the ones with the highest return on investment. We'll divide the number of hours and the value. And maybe we don't give you the first one, but we'll try and, to use a sports metaphor for those who like sports, we'll try and put something up on the board. Anyway, other than that, terrific presentation. My only complaint, more time, big topic. Yep. But terrific group. That's it for me.
That wish list, that's such a great place to start with. When I'm talking with a customer to get engagement, I always tell them I want 3 things. 1, tell me what your wish list is. Give me 10 items in English, highest at the top, lowest at the bottom. Number two, show me what you're currently using. Number three, show me what you produce. Let me see the reports or the output. Those help us get our arms very quickly around, what's going in, what's coming out, and what are you guys struggling with? And to that triaging point that Tony just mentioned, I'm looking for fast, easy for the developer to get the win on, high value to the customer, low cost. Those are the things where I just go, oh my God, we've hated that stupid color on the screen. And you go, oh, I can do that live in front of you, and magic happens. Those are the quick sugar rushes that I'm trying to get them. Again, that fast acting. We can talk about the long lasting stuff later, but it's nice to get some buy-in with that. Other questions, other comments, or
I'll throw out a closing statement on the topic, and that is, I think this topic is really, really important because my assessment personally is for the, if I'm lucky, I'll retire in 10 years. So I'm looking at the next 10 years in the FileMaker world. I think that learning how to engage with legacy system opportunities, whether they be with our current or past customers or other customers that are coming to us for that, is going to be a critical skill set for success over the next decade. So I think all these topics that we're talking about here are super important. And so that's the big thing that pops into my mind when I'm hearing all of us talk about this today.
Yeah, I'll second what Chris said. I'm seeing just a continuous ramp of we're currently using.
Yeah, that net new, those are not what they were in the past. The legacy people who are putting more weight on their systems and expecting more from them is why having remodeling and repair, you got to have those because it might be just a couple of loose boards, but other times you need to add a new wing or blow out a bathroom and put something new in there. And that's those are really good viable options.
I would argue there's a lot of opportunity to save existing engagements, right? Customers who have had their developer die. I'm sorry to say, but it's not. I think it was Chris, you said it, or Dave, you said it. Wasn't not the first time I've heard it. Right, or retire, right?
That's a big one.
Right, so I think there's a lot of, and we've talked about this with Claris. There's a lot of opportunity out there for rescue, and the rescue depends on you being able to frame this conversation in a way that it sounds like a no. There is a clear path forward. There is a beneficial, value.
It's responsible and appealing.
Exactly. And it doesn't cost. And by the way, it's not anything else is a quote unquote rebuild, which has a lot of detractors.
Right. All right. We're just a slight bit over right now. I want to close this thing down. I do want to say gracious appreciation to Cris Ippolite, Adam Aronson. I think this is our first time having Adam here. I'd love to welcome him back for additional thoughts, but thanks for the group and thanks for giving us a forum for this.
Amen.
Yeah, thank you guys. I'll just chime in and say it was really great conversation. Felt at moments a little bit like group therapy, which was
I'm Jewish, so it just comes with the territory.
But yeah, really valuable. We didn't get to really open it up to the room because there was so much you guys had to share, but maybe at a future meeting we'll open it up and do more of a round table, because I think everybody in the community has dealt with these issues, is dealing with them, and like you just pointed out, just going to deal with it more and more as we go forward. So thanks again. Big applause to the group.
Thanks everybody for having me.
Yeah.
I got to go make the school run, so I'm going to jump.
All right, sounds good. Thanks, Adam.
All right, thanks, guys.
And we're going to turn to Chris Moyer now for our monthly tech news roundup. So, Chris, the floor is yours.
All right, let me switch into gear here. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, some super fresh news here. For those of you fans of the Wayback Machine or the other aspects of the Internet Archive, they have been under waves of attack for the last 48 hours. A hacker group named SN Black Meta has been DDoSing them. They exfiltrated 31 million accounts and dumped them on Have I Been Pwned. So for those of you who have accounts on the Internet Archive, you might want to, if you reuse that password, which I know you wouldn't, but if you did, you would probably want to change your passwords. Troy Hunt, who's the founder of Have I Been Pwned, confirmed to Bleeping Computer that he had in fact received a database containing email addresses, screen names, bcrypt hash passwords, and other internal data for 31 million unique email addresses associated with the Internet Archive. So heads up on that one. And that's still ongoing. What I have at the top of the screen here is what I screenshotted about 4 hours ago. So they've been up and down over the last couple of days. There was also a Chinese hack accessing the largest ISPs, not just any large ISPs, but these are the keepers of the backbone of the internet. You're talking AT&T, Lumen, which is formerly CenturyLink, Verizon, and as I said, they manage the tier 1 backbone. And, you know, I think it was 30 years ago, there was a law put in place, I think either at the behest of the NSA or the CIA, that these large ISPs set up back doors for law enforcement or the intelligence agencies to use. And at the time, there was an outcry saying, what if the bad guys get in there? And say, no, 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 the bad guys will never get in there. Well, the bad guys got in there. So, yeah, I don't think there's anything more to say than that, other than the naysayers were right. And then this one is fallout from the earlier hurricane, not this latest hurricane, but spruce pine in Western North Carolina, I guess. Let me just confirm that. Yes, Asheville. Is the largest source in the world of ultra pure quartz, and this is used in silicon chip manufacturing. And I guess there are two different operators of the mine. The mine itself is huge. It's 25 miles long, I think 16 miles wide, huge tract of land, Monty Python reference there. And they got shut down from flooding from the thing. So the supply chain for chips, and I think people all over the world rely on these guys. The supply chain for chips has been disrupted. They've been down, I think, at least 2 weeks and are possibly still down. So
No, Chris,
are
I
they
just
back up?
saw an article on AP News this morning that they are back in production.
All right, thank you for that timely tip there. So yeah, that's good. Hopefully it does not throw a kink in the supply chain, you know, a month or two down the road, but good news there. Next up, so Windows 11 has a huge update. I mean, they have updates all the time, but this is a big one. And this one is sort of related to Copilot Plus. Copilot Plus has some minimum system requirements, 16 gig of RAM, 256 gig of storage, and an NPU, which is the sort of significant differentiator. Is going to support recall. I think we talked about recall a month or two ago. Recall is a feature, it's related to Microsoft's Copilot Plus. And basically every, X number of seconds, it will screenshot your screen so that you can sort of flip back through your day like one of those flip animation things and say, oh, what was I working on at 2:15 in the afternoon? It'll do that. And there was a hue and cry from the security community saying, hey, you're actually capturing passwords that people are using to get on secure systems and storing them in the clear. And Microsoft sort of poo-pooed that away and said, no, that's not happening. And then people released proof of concepts, and it turned out that actually that was happening. So this is back. And so heads up, I don't know how many of you are Windows 11 users and are going to be looking into the 24H2, but maybe give it a little scrutiny before you let that loose. Speaking of recall, the original version crashed and burned. It was announced in late May without having gone through any of the public Windows Insider testing that most new Windows features get. And I guess I don't know what else I want to say here other than it's affecting gaming performance. So if any of you are big gamers, I think I have a link at the bottom here on the Ars Technica article about impact to Asphalt 8 game crashes on some of these Windows 24 H2 systems. Okay. Microsoft has recalled it again. They've actually come up with an interesting fix for this issue. So the Windows recall issue was leaving secure data in insecure fashion. And this gets into other things too. It's actually FileMaker adjacent because I remember Oregon had a security auditor come out and check out the security of FileMaker systems. And so if you logged into a FileMaker system, that was secured, and then you forced the system down, force crashed the system, and then you ran a forensics tool to look at the memory variables that were there, sort of lingering the aftermath of the forced crash, you could find the credentials that you had used to log into FileMaker because they were stored in like an environment variable. It wasn't accessible by normal means, but if you had the special forensics tools from Microsoft, you were able to get at them. Microsoft has come up with this thing called VBS Enclaves. It's basically a dynamic link library. It's loaded up by a standard Windows application. And anything of this nature where you have security credentials or things like that are stored inside this VBS enclave so that even if you have full administrative access to the machine, you no longer can get at these, sensitive security credentials stored in this kind of protective bubble. So it's kind of an interesting security wrinkle. I would read up on it. It's news. It's the way of the future. And I thought it was really cool that they're finally locking some of this stuff down from, it adds a layer of protection against hackers. And that's what it looks like. And I highly recommend the article. I don't want to get into it now because we have other stuff to get to, but kind of an interesting thing. Yeah, I don't have anything more to add to that. I think I've already said my piece there. OpenAI introduced the real-time API. I don't know if anyone's heard of this. You, instead of interacting with ChatGPT through a chat window now, you can actually talk to it. And so it has low latency. So it can sort of do almost like human speech where you can speak asynchronously, where you and your buddy are like talking really excitedly and one's saying something and the other one's answering and stuff like that. And you can actually communicate back and forth at the same time. This is ultra low latency. So that just got announced on October 1. And if you want, you can do fast speech-to-speech experiences in your applications. Meta just had their developer conference towards the end of September. You've all probably heard of the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. And I have a follow-on story about those, but they also introduced Orion. And for those of you who've ever seen Scooby-Doo and Daphne with their big black glasses, that's what these Orion glasses look like. They are not releasing Orion at the moment. It's sort of a proof of concept, a prototype from their R&D labs. And it's really a showcase for how miniaturized they were able to get the compute power inside these glasses. The interesting thing about it, Apple has been talking about running ultra small LLMs at the edge on their device. So Apple Intelligence uses an LLM on a phone or an iPad. Meta is now trying to get LLMs running on Orion. They have it running on Orion, and they're shooting to add that to the Ray-Ban Meta glasses. And so I had a thought here. Real-time help. So Meta is sort of touting this as something to help you with your environmental context, where if you're exploring a new city, you can ask Meta to tag along and say, oh, what's this landmark? Or is there a great place to eat on the next block or anything like that? visually, this has the largest field of view in the smallest AI glasses form to date. So they've exceeded everybody just in some of the technical aspects of this. So it sounds cool. You know, the sort of famous last words are what could go wrong? And then we come up with these guys who came up with iX-ray. They, interestingly enough, were using the Meta Ray-Ban glasses, and they just wanted to see what could we do with these things. You know, what are the possibilities for these things? And so what they did was in real time, they can do facial recognition, match that up to a database, have the LLM match the name and contact details from the database with all their personal information, and then talk to these people as if they knew them. So it was almost like a Get Punked episode or something like that. So they'd walk up to a complete stranger on the street, get all this information from the thing and say, hey, didn't we know each other in English class or what have you? So they're absolutely able to do this. It's, you know, when Google Glass first came out, I think people were walking around with that and everyone freaked out that they're having their privacy invaded. This is that way worse, full heads up, you know, doxing operation, walking around in a pair of glasses. And so because of the implications of this, they are not releasing the project, but they certainly said how they did it, and that it's a real possibility with this technology now. And other fun news, Earth now has 2 moons. An asteroid came by, I think it's called 2024 PT5. And it's not going to stick around for too long. I think we're going to have it for about 2 months, but for as of right now, we have 2 moons, and it will it entered our orbit temporarily on September 29th. And I think it will stick around till November 25th, 2024. It just came swinging by and will be visiting us for a while. Say hi. And then this last one is just a random thing I got in my email. JARS AI. I don't know why they thought people would want to do this, but basically you roll up on this website and it's like, you can have your own court case. What do you want to do? And you get some ridiculous examples like the ones you see on the left here. So a car is sued by a sandwich for running over it and becoming a panini. The sun's sued by the moon, etc. You just pick one and it'll just start riffing on this stuff. I have no idea what the use case is. Maybe for people who have to deal with the public to do training interactions or something like that, but I thought it was odd and worth sharing. So for those of you who want to check it out, take a look at the JARS court. And then I don't actually have a slide for this, but Alexei Dubov, who has presented at DevCon a couple of times, he did some interesting stuff with SDKs in years past, getting FileMaker Go apps to talk to other systems, so a lot of interoperability stuff. He just put up FMSecurity.com. Some of you may have heard some rumblings about him. He discovered a vulnerability in FileMaker Server, and he, FileMaker or Claris / Apple was not interested in giving him a bug bounty for it, but he has disclosed it, they have fixed it, and so now he's telling his side of the story about how he did it. He actually has 3 blog posts, one dated October 1st, one the 2nd, and one on the 5th, just about roughly how this works. He doesn't get into all the details, but enough to make you go, holy smokes. And then the other one I want to mention is someone who we are about to hear from, David Hamann, looking very chipper in his mugshot there, talking about access privilege escalation on FileMaker Server. So this is a recently published post on his blog as well, so you should check that out. He can be found at davidhamann.de 2024, and off you go. So, and David, feel free to mention that if you want to. So I'm going to stop sharing and hand the reins back over.
Thank you, Chris. Great roundup as always. There's one other I would throw in that's been making the rounds. Notebook LM If you haven't, it's a project from Google. If you haven't seen or heard this yet, it'll blow your mind. You basically can feed it any document or group of documents, and it creates a podcast with two people, two voices, a male voice and a female voice by default, discussing whatever it was in the document you sent them, or documents. And it's amazing how realistic it sounds, including the pauses, the voices sound, really realistic. And then like, yeah, I agree. And then there's this other aspect, and they just go back and forth. And, one example I saw, someone sent it like this privacy policy. It's like a 99-page privacy policy from one of the online services. And they actually like talk about it and explain it and say, well, be careful of this. And there's this thing that they're doing this with your data. And other people have fed it, scripts from other podcasts. One of the podcasts I listened to gave it their script, and then it created a new version of his podcast. Anyhow, check out Notebook LM. It's really an amazing example of where things are going with AI these days. All right, without further ado, I'm gonna pause recording. Okay, so for our last presentation today, we have David Hamann. Hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, David. Welcome, first-time presenter, and is this your first time attending FMDiSC as well?
Yes, correct.
Great, well, welcome on both fronts. We obviously love having new presenters and new members. So yeah, big thank you to Cris Moyer for suggesting your presentation, and the floor is yours.
So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, perfect. Yeah, thanks again for inviting me to give this talk. I'm going to explain a little bit of my research on the FMP12 file format internals and how accounts and passwords are stored in FileMaker files. And oops, yeah. So a little bit of background on that front. So I was always interested in how FileMaker stores its data, what goes in a file, how the files are organized, and so on. But also noticed there's not much information out there about the file format, because it's like not an open format, and certainly not any information about how accounts and passwords are stored in the file, and also yeah, how much they actually protect a file that you might distribute to your clients. And if you go to some of the forums, you might have seen mentioning of some password reset tools. They are mentioned sometimes when you lose the password to your file, but I've also not seen any explanation on how they actually work, and sometimes they're mentioned with a disclaimer that they might damage your file, and whatever that means. And yeah, so I took the opportunity to research this a little bit and see what I can find out about the internals of the file format first, as the basis to understand the accounts and passwords, how they are stored. And I also think that if you invest a lot of time and money in your solution files, that you should have like an idea of how your files are protected and how the file format works, and but that knowledge is not only hidden away at those password reset tool vendors. So just a few clarifications. We're talking about local files here. So the assumption is that we have access to the file, and so not client to server communication. So you need access to the file. All the information that I'm showing is, of course, based on my observations, and also a few assumptions that are not 100% provable, because yeah, it's not an open format, but I guess it's enough to understand or get an idea of how things work, and maybe also enough to do a little bit of damage and figure things out. And there will be quite a lot of slides that explain a lot of information on one slide. So I start with 4 theoretical slides that make the other ones a bit easier to understand before we jump into the actual topic. And the first 3 slides are about number bases. It's just, we're going to look at a lot of byte values in the next hour or so. So it's easy to know when you look at a number what that number represents. And we're looking at base 10, base 2, and base 16. And so here's just a short refresher on how you can convert numbers. So if we start with base 10, that's kind of the number system we are used to every day. And if we, for example, take this number 2024 here on the left, we can use the formula on the right to actually get to this number 2024 by just looking at the individual digits and see how much each digit contributes to the total value. So you can start on the left and take this number 2, and multiply that by the base, so this base 10, to the power of the place of that digit. So starting from 0, 0, 1, 2, 3, we could do 2 times 10 to the power of 3, which is 2 times 1000, which is 2000. And if we do that with the other digits as well, we end up with the number 2024. And of course, that's not how you approach decimal numbers when you see them, but this formula is actually the same for the other number bases as well. So it's easy to convert from the other bases to decimal with this formula. And of course, in base 10, we have 10 possible values per digit. So if you look at base 2, those numbers are usually prefixed with a 0B. And an example number could be this 1101. And as you notice, like each digit can have 2 possible values here, 0 or 1. And again, each digit contributes a certain value to the total number. So if we take the same formula that we used for base 10, we can again start on the left side. We can do 1 times 2, which is the base, to the power of 3, which is again the place of that number, of the digit, and have like 1 times 2 to the power of 3, which is 1 times 8, which is 8. And if we do that for all the digits, we end up with 8 plus 4 plus 0 plus 1, and end up with the decimal value of 13. And as the last number base that is relevant, we have base 16. And in base 16, we have we have for each digits, we have 16 possible values. So 0 to 9, and then A to F, because we only have 10 numeric values that with one digit that can. So we need to use the letters A to F as well. And a number here can again be converted to decimal, again using the same formula. So I have this number which looks like cafe. And if we look at this, we can see that on the left side, it starts with C, which is 12, because we do like 0 to 9, and then A is 10, B is 11, and C is 12. And then we essentially look at what this digit contributes to the total value, and that is 12 times the base, 16 to the power of 3, which is again the position of that digit starting from 0. And those hexadecimal numbers are often prefixed with 0x. So if you see a 0x in a number, then that means that's in hexadecimal representation. And so the last theoretical slide before we actually jump in, since we're looking at byte values, 1 byte has 8 bits, which means we have 256 possible values in 1 byte, so 0 to 255. And as an example here, we have this 0B, 1, bunch of zeros, 1. This is the binary representation, which is the same as 0x81, the hexadecimal representation, which is the same as 129 in decimal. And why do we even use different representations? That comes in handy when you look at larger values. So if we have at the bottom here, we have a 16-bit number, and you can see if these 16 bits wouldn't be all ones, it would be quite hard to glance at the value and say, okay, this is that number, or this is how many bytes or even bits are in that value. So if you look at the same value in hexadecimal, you can see that every byte can be represented in 2 hex digits. So here we have 0xFF. And looking at this just visually, we can see this is exactly 2 bytes. And again, looking at the decimal version here, this is 65,535. And just glancing at that, you wouldn't really know how many bytes that represents, for example. Yeah, with that being said, we can jump into the learning a bit about the FMP12 file format. So if we open just any FileMaker file with the hex editor, we can see something like this on the right here, where in blue these are the so-called magic byte signature that just is a unique sequence of bytes that that says what kind of file we're looking at, so that the application that is reading the file can see these magic bytes, byte values, and then decide how to parse the file. So this is quite common. So if you look at a JPEG file or a PNG file, you would have like a different kind of signature at the front, so that the for example, the image viewer would know, okay, this is a PNG file. This is how I will parse the file and display the image in that example. Then we have some metadata after the signature. Here we have this HBAM7 string, which I believe is the internal name of the file format. And if the file would be encrypted, this would be HBAM-E, and then the rest of the file would obviously be encrypted. And I believe only the shared ID you would get like in clear text, because that's required to open multiple files. If you scroll down just visually in your hex editor, looking at the raw bytes, you can easily tell that the file is structured in 4 kilobyte blocks. And that is easy to see because the blocks are usually not filled completely. So you always have some null bytes until the beginning of the next multiple of 4096 bytes. That might be a bit harder to see if you're looking at a compacted file, but in generally that's the structure of the file. Yeah, at the beginning I said it was hard to find any online resources about the file format, but there were 3 that were helpful in kickstarting that research that I did. There are 2 under the hood talks by Clay Meckel from DEF CON, and there's also a FMP tools code repository on GitHub by a guy named Evan Miller, who wrote some C program to extract data from FileMaker files, and also documented some of the file format and operation codes that we are going to look at. So if we look at an individual block in a file, we can see that it usually starts with some metadata, and then after that a big payload section, which is kind of the meat of the block, where everything is stored from record data to scripts, custom functions, whatever is in an FMP file. And those blocks are organized as a doubly linked list. So in this metadata in the beginning, you have a reference to what block came before and what block comes after. So if you read the first few bytes of the block, you can essentially figure out what offset to jump to in the file to read the next block, and step by step then read the whole file into memory. So yeah, there's a bit of other metadata in the beginning, but that's not so relevant for what we are trying to find out. So the important thing are the previous and next ID, where that references the previous or next block. So the payload inside a block is just a sequence of bytes, and it usually starts with some kind of a bytecode that tells us what data we're looking at. Then usually a bit of meta information like the length of the data that is to follow, and then the data itself. And there are many of those bytecodes, and obviously there's not a complete list publicly available, but yeah, most of it is essentially key value pairs, but you could also have things like segmented data. If you have like data that is too large to fit in one block, that it's needs to be segmented over multiple blocks. But the most important things we're looking for in this presentation are the key value types. Additionally, there are also some operation codes for a push and a pop operation to indicate at what position a certain piece of data lives in the file. So you can think of we push, or we push some values onto a path, and then we have some data that lives at that path. So let's say we have the account name stored in the file somewhere, and we have a bunch of push operations that create a path. Then we can later reference, give me the data at that path 1, 2, 3. And then we can access the account name at that position. So when you start looking into the raw bytes of the file itself, one way to do that is you open the file in a hex editor, and on the other side you open FileMaker Pro, and then you start just entering some data. And the best way to do that is usually to enter some unique data that you can search for on the other side by looking at the raw bytes. So you could, for example, put a known string like 6 times A into like a record, or you could name your script like this, or your account name, and then see how the raw bytes change in the file and at what position. And if you do that, you will quickly notice that the information as you put it in is not stored like this in the file itself. So those 6 A's, you will see that there are 6 bytes added somewhere or changed somewhere, but they won't be those A's. So if you look at the hex values again, those A's would normally be represented in ASCII as hex 41. So that's decimal 65, and 65 is the ASCII code for capital A. But what you instead see is that, for example, for the A's, and instead of seeing this hex 41, you see hex 1B. And that is because every data that is input goes through some XOR operation to obfuscate, I guess, a little bit how the data is stored in the file. And how an XOR operation works is it's basically an exclusive OR. So you take the bits of 2 bytes, and then you do a bitwise exclusive OR operation. So whenever you have a 1, or whenever the values differ, kind of, you have a 1, otherwise you have a 0. So this 1, 0 would equal 1, and this 1, 1 would equal 0, and so on. Because it's 1 or 0, and it's an exclusive OR, so only 1 can be 1. Yeah, and if you now see those hex 1Bs in the file, and you want to figure out what bytes they used for this XOR operation, you can just cycle through all possible byte values to arrive back at your hex 41, which would be the ASCII code for capital A. And yeah, again, going back to the very early slides where we looked at base 2, we can see here the number that comes out of this XOR operation would be 1 times 2 to the power of 6, which would be 64, and 1 times 2 to the power of 0, which would be 1. Adding this together would be 65. and 65 would be the ASCII code for capital A. In the same way you would use the char function in FileMaker. As an example of a payload, we can look at this example here. We see this hex 6, 10, 5, 1b, 3e, and so on. In this example, this 0x6 would be the code for a key value pair. This hex 10 would be the key itself. The hex 5 would be the length of the data that follows. And then you would have the actual data, which would be these 5 bytes. And if you do the XOR operation on these 5 bytes, you will see that hex 1b, as we saw, is capital A. Then we do a hex 3e XORed with this hex 5a, comes out at D, and so on. So this is how the string admin would be stored in the file. And I also mentioned at the beginning that there are some operations like a push and a pop to create like the hierarchy of where things are stored, and so that you can access certain values at certain paths. And this is again just an example here, this hex 40, 40, 20, 17, and so on. And so this would appear somewhere in the payload in a block. And if we assume that our current path value is 17.1, so it's just arbitrary value here, then this passing these bytes would essentially work like this. You would encounter this hex 40. This is the code for a pop operation. You would pop 1 off the path, so you end up with the path being 17. You do another hex 40. You end up with the path being empty because you popped off the 17. And then you go on with the hex 20, which is the push operation. And the argument to that is the hex 17, not to confuse with this decimal 17. This pushes the value hex 17 onto the path. So hex 17 is 23. And then we go on until we create a certain path value. And if we then would have this key value pair that we just saw with the key of n, then we could think of this piece of data living at path 23.1.1.n, where n would be the key. You also see those hex 80s. This is actually the code for no operation, so it doesn't do anything, so it doesn't change anything. It's mostly to fill like the gaps or align a block or something, but it has no relevance to the application reading the file. So that was a lot of information how an FMP12 file can be parsed, basically. So with this information, you could write a program that goes through the blocks and then passes out the different pieces of information that are stored in the file. Again, this you would need to understand those bytecodes and what they mean, because the payload is just, and each block is just a sequence of bytes. So if you don't understand a certain bytecode, you wouldn't know how much to read or when the next code basically starts. So in order to read the complete file, you would need to either have complete knowledge of all the codes, or you would need to, if you encounter a code that you cannot understand, you would basically skip the rest of the block and jump to the next block and hope that whatever you want to get out of the file doesn't live in the block that you couldn't pass. But all that doesn't really give us any information yet about the accounts, and also not of the passwords, or if the passwords are even stored, or how they are stored. But what we can do is we can take some files, some FMP12 files that we have. We can store, we can create some account names or accounts in those files and name them in a certain way, and then just parse the file with our parser with the rules that I just explained, and then see where those account names are usually stored. And if we do that a couple of times, we will see that they're usually stored at a certain path, for example, 23.1.5.1, or 0.2 for the next account, 0.3, and so on. So usually we can see they have like the same parent path. And when we pass the file, we can now kind of see where at least the name of the account is stored in this XORed form. And what we can also do, we can make the assumption that things related to the account might be stored nearby. So maybe they have the same parent path value. So we can see, okay, the account name admin is stored here. So maybe around that we will find other data, like information about the privilege set, or if the account is enabled or disabled, or maybe the password information. So this is how some section of a payload looks that stores the account information. And if I highlight this a little bit, you can see this blue highlighted one with the blue background. That's actually the hex 1B, 3E, and so on. This is the admin string encoded here. And the red things are the operations that are going on. So this would be a pop operation. That would be a push 20. Then we would have a no operation. Then we would have a key value pair, and so on. So if we take this thing apart, it kind of looks like a more readable form, like this box here on the right. So we can assume that our current path is 23.151. With our pop and then our push, we would have this path 23.152, because we pop the 1 off, we push the 2 to the path, and then we have values stored at certain keys. So this one here at key 4 is like a 16-byte value, and we know this because the length is hex 10. So this is this 10 here, and hex 10 is 16. So we can read the 16 bytes from this position, and it comes out with this sequence, which we don't understand yet, but we know it's there. And if we go on, we also see this key 6, which is a 59-byte value. And that's, yeah, we also don't have any information about this yet, except that it might be related to the account. So it continues with the other ones until we also reach this key 16, which stores our account name in XORed form. And what we can do now is we can do a couple of experiments. So if we open the file that we passed and we change the password of the admin account, we can see how those values change. So this kind of looks like it could be some kind of hash, because every time we change the password, we see that this byte sequence here completely changes, but it stays always 16 bytes. And with this key 6 here, we see that this also completely changes except for the first byte, but it completely changes with whenever you change the account. And it also varies in length. So this is also interesting to note. It's not like always the same length. As a note, so for the rest of the talk, we are mostly looking at those two keys here. So key 4, which is a 16-bit value that has a fixed length, and the key 6, which is the 59-byte value, which varies actually in length. So it might not necessarily be 59 bytes, but in our example, it will be 59 bytes. What are our options to continue now to figure out more? So one option would be to continue to make slight changes in FileMaker and see how they're represented in the raw bytes of the file, so in a hex editor. And to some degree, we can figure things out, but for some things, it will be almost impossible because we just don't know the conversion steps that go on until something is stored in the file. So from entering a password into your when you set up the account to what is stored in the file, there are a couple of steps that need to happen. And just by looking at the end result, that's kind of hard to figure out those steps. The other option would be to open the file with some kind of application that is designed to understand FMP12. So this could be FileMaker Pro server, the migration tool, the developer tool, and then attach a debugger to that application and actually look at the instructions that the computer executes to whenever the file is read. And the third option would be like the lazy option. We could just start changing some things in the file and see what happens. Like, can we do we destroy the file, or do we break it? That is actually the lazy option. So that's why we will start with this. So we can test, for example, what happens if we know where the admin string of our account name is stored. So what if we just change the admin in the file and change it to David, for example? Could we then open up the file in FileMaker Pro and enter David as the account name and our password, and would we still get in? No. When that happens, we get a nice warning from the FileMaker Pro application that the access privileges in this file have been damaged or possibly tampered with, and that we should contact technical support. So I guess that's what happens when you don't understand it fully and change some things that you don't really understand. So we get kind of a slap from FileMaker, and our tampering is detected. But even though our attempt to change like the account name, for example, wasn't successful, we can still have some lessons learned from these tests. So we saw that when we modify an account name, we get this tamper alert. We also can see that if we modify some of the potential hashes nearby the account name, that we also get this tamper alert. And we can also see that when we change other things that are stored near the or at the same parent path of the account, we also get this tamper alert. So there must be one a checksum over all the data that FileMaker can read or can recompute and then compare with what is stored in the file. So otherwise they wouldn't be able to tell, has something changed kind of off the record or not. So that's also valid information that we can note down and continue our research. And another interesting thing, we can see that when we change the password, then the value at this path 231524, or actually the key 4 is the relevant thing here, changes completely, but again, it has a fixed length of 16 bytes. And the value at key 6 also changes, but has a variable length every time we change the password. But we can also see that it always starts with the same value of 1. So we can also write this down and keep that in mind for our continued research. So to really make progress now, we need some way to understand how a program that is designed to understand FMP12 files and to parse them, we need to see what those programs are actually doing so that we can continue in our with our research question, how accounts and passwords are actually stored, like what algorithm is used for the passwords. Are they actually hashed? Are they not hashed? Is there some sort value that is used? And to do that, we can use a debugger and any kind of binary that is designed to read FMP12 files. So I'm using GDB here, and I'm passing as argument the FM data migration binary that I'm sure everyone knows here. So you can just migrate from one file into another. So I pass those command line arguments as the application expects, and I pass in my test FMP12 file, and with the source account of admin and a source password of whatever. And what I pass here as the password doesn't really matter for looking at the application, because we just want to see like where in memory that whatever ends up. And the way we approach this, once we have loaded the application in the debugger, is we can dump the symbol information about the binary that we're debugging and see if we can find some interesting functions that I mentioned there, and then set breakpoints at those functions and see if those functions are called, and when they are called, how they are called. And if you want to learn a bit more how this works, I explained this in a blog post last year when I looked at the how the FileMaker server stores those encryption at rest passwords. I go a bit more into how you can do this in this blog post mentioned at the bottom here. So when we look at the symbol information, we find a function that is called compute password hash, and we can assume it has something to do with computing password hashes. And what we can do in GDB, again, this is the debugger, we can set a breakpoint at this function, and then we can run the migration tool through the debugger and see if our breakpoint hits. And when it does, we can see what the arguments are that are passed to this compute password hash function. And the way we do that, since obviously we don't have any source code of this function and don't know the arguments, we can just look at how the arguments are passed based on calling conventions of our platform that we're using. So this is on Linux and x86, and the arguments to the function functions are passed in certain CPU registers, and This is like a quote from this ABI, application binary interface document, where it states that the arguments are passed in the registers RDI, RSI, RDX, and so on. And so our strategy is now we set a breakpoint at this function, and when that function starts, we look at the CPU registers and get those values out of those registers, and then see if we can somehow make sense of those values, and then compare them to what we can see in the FMP12 file, and see if we can somehow figure out what goes into computing a password hash. So if we do this, we can start with the first argument here. So this is the RDI register. And this points to a location in memory where the password that we passed in the clear on the command line, or whatever password, is stored. And it's stored as 16-bit characters. So we have like 2 bytes per character. So our W would be kind of a 0 padded, so hex 00, and then the ASCII code for W. And so we know our password that we pass. The migration tool actually ends up in this compute password hash function. We can also see that we pass another value into this function, and this is matches some section of this value that we saw at this path with the key 6. So this was this 59-byte value that I mentioned earlier. We can see that this memory address points to from the second byte of this value to in a length of 10 bytes. So the next argument is actually the length of this. So hex A is 10, decimal 10. So we have 10 bytes from this 59-byte sequence that are actually passed to this function. If we continue with the arguments that are passed, we also see that there's some fixed string that's passed to the function that is always the same. And as a hint, it starts with file. And continuing in the argument order, we can see that this fixed string is actually 30 bytes, so it's more than just the word that you think. And finally, we can also see there's a value of 1 being passed to the function. We don't know if that plays a role in any way, but we note this down for later. And additionally, if you run out of registers here, there are some values passed on the stack, which is a memory area that you can use for passing things to functions. So what do we know so far? So at the bottom, you see this 59-byte sequence that we discovered in the file. And we also saw that the 10 bytes here, like from the second byte, are actually stored to this, passed to this compute password hash function. So looking at this and looking at this first byte here, we could make an assumption that this is like a salt value for maybe a password hash that follows. So the one we also don't really know, but maybe it's some kind of version. So if they ever would change like the password algorithm, they could like indicate this with the first byte. So this would be kind of a common way to do this. We also saw that there's like a fixed string or sequence of bytes that is passed to this function, so which is always the same. We have again this fixed value of 1, which may or may not play a role. And we know that the clear text password is passed to the function, which also makes sense because you would need to pass like the clear text in to get like the hashed version out. If we dive a bit deeper into this function and look at the individual assembly instructions, we can see that there's another XOR operation going on. And this is an XOR operation between a value that is at this memory address and a value that is in this AX register. And this AX register is the lower 16 bits of the RAX register. So we have kind of two values that are going through this exclusive OR operation, both of them being 16 bits or 2 bytes long. And if we resolve this memory address and look what is actually stored there, we can see that it is the first character of our whatever password that we passed in. It's here in reversed order because it's stored in little endian, so the order is actually 0077. And this is XORed with the first 2 characters of our fixed value that was always the same, and that starts with file. So we have like this FI, and we XOR that with the W. And when we do this, we get this hex 46.1e out. And this is actually happening in the loop. So for every, it continues essentially for the whole length of the password, so that we get, when we go through this loop and we note down all the results, we end up with some sequence of bytes that is kind of like an XORed version of the password that we passed in. Going a bit further down in the function, we also see function calls to 2 OpenSSL functions from the OpenSSL library, which is an open source library, which has the advantage of we can look at the documentation or even the code if we want to understand what is going on. So we see at the top here, we are using a SHA-1 hashing function. And we are also making a call to this pbkdf2 function, which is a password-based key derivation function. Essentially, you pass in a password and a salt value and a hashing function, and then you and an iteration count, and then you tell it, make a key from this input. And that key that I want to get out is like of a certain length. And the advantage of this calling this function here or discovering this function is that we can set a breakpoint there, and we can look at the documentation of OpenSSL and see actually the order of the arguments and also what they semantically mean. So we know this function accepts as a first argument a password, then a password length, then a salt length, some iteration count, digest or a hashing function, the key length that we want to get out, and some location where the result should be stored. So having stopped at this key derivation function, we can look again at the CPU registers and see what is in those values. So if we start again from the first argument, RDI, we can see that this points to the XORed password that we earlier created. So this 46.1e and so on. And in the RSI register, we see that the length of this XORed password. So this is 16 bytes. And if you think about the whatever password was 8 bytes long, but we stored it as 16-bit character values. So we have like 16 bytes of input here. If we continue to this third argument, this should be the salt value that is passed in. This would be in an RDX. So this points to a location in memory where we see the 10 bytes that we earlier saw and that we assumed could be a salt value. So this is now actually confirmed that this is used as a salt value because we can look up the documentation here and see this function expects a salt value, and this exactly comes out at this first or from the second byte in this 59 byte long sequence for 10 bytes. This is now like the salt value that is used when this function is called. Yeah, continuing, we can see that an iteration count of 1 is passed to this function, which is rather low, but we just note it down for now. And the desired key length that you want to get out is passed as 20. So 20 bytes long should be the key or the hash that we're getting out of this function. And if we run this function towards the end and see what actually the result is of this function, we see that the 20 bytes that come out of this function are actually the 20 bytes that follow this 10 byte salt value in, again, this 59 byte long byte sequence at key 6. So we kind of figured out the first part of this value that is stored in the file. So we have still kind of unknown this first byte here of 1, but it's always 1. So we can just accept that. We have the 10 byte salt value here in blue, and then we have our password hash of 20 bytes here. Then we still have some unknown gray part at the end. And that was quite a lot of information. So just as a summary, we take the password as 16-bit characters. We take the salt and fixed value, that is always the same. And in a loop, we XOR the password with that fixed value. And then the result of this, so the XOR result, we then pass into this key duration function, which with the SHA-1 hashing function. And then we get the hash value that is actually stored in the FMP12 file. So what is this gray part at the end? So we saw that when we changed the password in FileMaker, then in the file, actually the length of this this value varies. So if we know that we always have this 1 byte here, and we have 10 byte salt value, and we have 20 byte hash, then we know that the rest of this one is actually the variable part. So we need to figure out where that comes from or where that is computed. And another function that we can find in the binary is this password read function. And in there we see that they're taking actually the first byte of the salt value and the first byte of the password hash, and they do another XOR operation. So this caret here is a symbol for the XOR operation. And the result of that is appended to the end of this 59 byte long byte sequence here. And this happens in a loop. So for the whole length of the password, and since we XOR the salt and the password hash here, and they have different lengths, we actually XOR the salt plus the password with the password, and then end up with this kind of checksum at the end, this green part. In the assembly instructions, it looks like this. So we have an XOR with the first byte of the hash and the first byte of the salt. And then in a loop, what they actually do is they compare the stored value in the file with the one that the application computes. So if there's like a difference between those two, then obviously this kind of checksum is not valid anymore. And then I guess they can show like this tamper alert. So we know salt and password plus password hash are taken, XORed byte by byte, and create this kind of checksum. And now you might wonder, if the salt is 10 bytes, the password hash is 20 bytes, why is this checksum at the end actually has a variable length? And to figure this out, we need to look at yet another function called match password data. And what we find there is that they are loading the second byte of the password hash, and then doing a bitwise AND operation. So you take a fixed byte value, hex 1F, and you take this second byte of the password hash, and then you do a bitwise AND operation, which means you take every bit of the byte and do an AND operation. So 1 and 1 is 1, and everything else is 0. So this hex 1F is essentially, so the largest value that can come out of this is hex 1F or 31 itself, because this would be then all ones here. But in this case of our example, we have this hex BC and hex 1F, bitwise AND hex BC comes out as hex 1C, which is decimal 28, and this turns out to be exactly the length of this, where this checksum is truncated. So now we kind of have understand all the pieces that go into this value that is stored at this key 6. And we can actually choose any kind of password that we want, and leave this gray part at 1. We can leave the salt value as it is, or we can create a new salt, doesn't really matter. We know how to recompute our password hash, and we also know how to recompute our checksum there at the end, and know where to truncate it, that it's in the same length. And there's one tricky thing here. If you recompute a new hash, obviously most of the time the second byte will be different than this, and this controls the length of the checksum at the end. So if we do this and we have like a now not 59 bytes anymore, but some shorter byte sequence, and we insert that back into the file, we obviously the whole block is not aligned anymore, and we could have like some corrupted file. But what we can do is we can do a small trick here. We can just brute force salt values that end up combined with the password to have this BC second byte, and then it stays at in this case 59 bytes. So what happens if we do all this, recompute everything for some new password, and we change exactly this part in the FMP12 file, replace it, and open the file up with FileMaker Pro? Would we then be able to log in with our new password and would have successfully reset the password? We can try this out, and we still don't have enough knowledge to successfully reset the password. So we again get our slap and our dialog saying that something was tampered, and yeah, it's kind of detecting our tampering. And if you remember from the very beginning, I showed you this other key, this key 4. We had the 16-byte value that was always changing completely when we changed the password, but it would always stay 16 bytes long. And this value, we can now inspect a little bit more. And we're almost there, so a little bit of patience. Yeah, this value, if we think about it, when we replaced this 59-byte sequence and we correctly computed every part of it, how can FileMaker tell that we tampered with the data? Because if we just replace some part and FileMaker is not open, how would they know that something was changed in the file? So there must be some piece of information in the file that has some kind of checksum over the account information, including the salt and the password, because otherwise there wouldn't be no chance to tell if that was modified or not. So what we can do, we can see if we can figure out where this first hash there, the 16-byte value comes from. And if we dig in a bit more into the binary, we can see that there's this compute CRC function. And this is called like for every account in the file. And we can just look at the nth call to this function, where n is the account number that we are currently looking at. So for admin, it was the 2. So this function calls another function a couple of times, but what we notice is it has a lot of calls to, again, an OpenSSL function MD5 update. And that would match kind of our assumption from the beginning. We have 16-byte value, which could be the output from an MD5 function. And we can continue with our strategy, just setting a breakpoint at this MD5 update function and looking at the OpenSSL documentation, what this function expects. And we can see it expects this MD5 context here. But more interestingly, it expects the second argument to be the data that you want to put into the hash, and then the length of the data you put into the hash. And we can break at each call to MD5 update until MD5 final is called, which kind of finalizes the hash. So this would be a call to MD5 update, and we see that we have some memory address here at RSI, register RSI, and we have the length of the data here in RDX. So this is hex 10 or 16 bytes. So if we in the debugger examine 16 hex bytes from this RSI register, we see that it contains this these byte values. We don't really understand what those byte values mean, but we can write them down and continue for every MD5 update call what goes into the MD5 function. And if we do this and actually then look into the FMP12 file again, if we see those components that go into the MD5 hash and write down the path where those components appear, and then write a program that creates a hash, an MD5 hash with those components, then we can see if what comes out of that program of this MD5 hash call is the same that is actually stored at this key 4 in the FMP12 file. And it turns out there are 10 components that go into this MD5 hash, including the salt and the password, which makes sense in retrospect because when we changed those, the tampering was detected. But if we know all those 10 components and where to find them in the file, we can recompute that hash ourselves for the new salt and password hash and checksum that we created before, and have then essentially the same value as FileMaker expects at this position. So finally, can we choose a password, recreate all the checksums that we saw, and overwrite the values at the key 4. So this is the MD5 hash, and the key 6, which was in the example this 59-byte sequence containing the salt password hash and some checksum and maybe a version number. Insert that back into the FMP12 file, and then open the file and put our new password in, and FileMaker opens the file, does it. So we put the password in, and this time the roles are reversed, and we successfully reset the password without any tamper detection alert being shown. And a couple of additional information about this. So when you use encryption at rest, that's exactly what protects you from this, that someone resets your password, because of course, if the file is encrypted, you cannot even parse the contents of it to find out and to replace things. There's still some unknown bytecodes that I haven't figured out. But as I said in the beginning, usually you can just skip a block if you get some bytecode that you don't understand, if the information that you are looking for is not in that particular block that you're skipping. Some components that go into this last hash and into this MD5 hash are semantically not clear to me what they actually mean, but that really doesn't stop you from resetting the password, because you can, as long as you know the path where those values are stored in the file, you can just get them from there. And even if you cannot find them there, you can always get them from the debugger. If you have full access removed from the file, of course, theoretically, it would be possible to add it back in, and also add the privilege set back in. But it would probably be a lot of hard work and harder than what I showed you, because you would also need to realign the blocks and everything. So that's probably tough to do. Also remember, when you just want to get some data out of a file, and you don't really need an account and password if you don't use FileMaker Pro. So if you write your own parser to parse out data, you can just ignore the account and password, because you have the data already in raw form in the file, given the file is not encrypted. Is the file integrity still intact after replacing the hashes? And as far as I can tell, yes. So you don't break any. You can recover the file, and it will show you that everything is fine, because we don't really change the block structure. Of course, there's never really a guarantee, because it's not publicly documented. But as far as I can tell, that's fine. And those password reset tools that are commercially available, how do they work? So someone actually sent me 2 files, one original and one that was where the password was reset with one of those commercial tools. And if you pass both files, you can see that exactly the only difference is those key 4 and key 6 in the file. So they do exactly what I just described. And lastly, of course, this is all just informational. I'm not really looking to get into the business of resetting people's passwords. So maybe use the commercially available tools, or better contact Claris if you have an actual problem with that. And yeah, with that, if you have any questions, feel free to ask. Also, because there's a lot of content, I've written a blog post about this, but I did not include any proof of concept script. So there's no script that you can download that resets your password, but it's basically explaining the theoretical foundation and how much those accounts and passwords protect you, you can then make the judgment for yourself. Yeah, that was the presentation.
Thank you, David. That was quite a deep dive. Very, very impressive work. I have a few questions, and then if anybody else has, we can open it up. But
Sure.
how long did this take you? How long were you working on this?
I think to get to the actual result, to understand it, I think it was about 80 hours. So quite a lot of time being like wired in into this. But it was, of course, stretched over some time because I don't have like 80 hours nonstop. I also need to earn some money in between. But yeah, that's like roughly the amount of time it took.
That's
and
great.
I think the writing the blog post, I think, took more time than figuring everything out.
Right, there you go. Documenting is the hardest part. I'm guessing you have a CS background where you learned all these tools and techniques, or was this self-taught? Did you develop
pretty much self-taught. I never went to university or anything. So just interested generally how computers work, and also I'm doing some security work as well, where you like analyze programs, and that's you learn like bits and pieces, pick up things, and then you put it back together. And it's also I did some like hacking challenges a few times where you need to figure out certain challenges, and that kind of also goes in line with like understanding what the computer is doing, or what typical data structures look like, or typical flaws in software, and so on.
Right. And you don't feel free not to answer this if you don't care to, but have you had any contact with people from Claris in response to your blog post? Or
in response to this blog post, no, but I've reported a couple of security issues over the last few years, and there in the past it was like always going through email. Like they have had this security at Claris contact, where you could report bugs or security related issues, and then later they joined the Apple bug bounty program, and also the post that Cris mentioned in his section, that's also something that I reported over the bug bounty program from Apple, and then basically all the communication goes kind of anonymous, like from their side. You don't really know who you're chatting with, but they are basically trying to reproduce issues, and then issuing a fix, and then eventually a release comes out. Yeah.
Great. Anyone else have any questions for David before we wrap up? All right.
It was a lot of content, so feel free to read the blog post, and you can feel free to email me if you have some questions.
I don't have any questions.
I don't have any questions. I just think it was a great presentation, and I'm wondering what Stephen would have to comment on that.
Yeah, I'm not sure if he's
Mr. Blackwell, did he nap off?
Oh, I'm right here, and I don't have any immediate comment on this.
Cannot hear you, Stephen.
I said I'm here. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yes.
Very faint.
And I don't have any immediate comment on this. I have seen some of this before, and actually have written about a couple of items, but more information will be coming subsequently, hopefully.
Great, thanks. Any other, Dave, you were starting to say something? Or
No, I was just trying to reach out to Stephen.
Oh, okay, Lynn, did you?
I was just saying, it must feel really rewarding when a bug fix comes out with an issue that you've identified, to know that you've helped all of us be more protected.
Yeah, it's sometimes a little bit slow, but as long as there eventually is a fix released, that's good. Yeah.
Agree with that 100%, and thank you to those of you who downloaded the paper that Wim and I wrote when FileMaker, or whatever we call it, 2024 came out.
Stephen,
right.
where can that paper, Stephen, where can that paper that you and Wim wrote be found?
On the FM forum site. If we can hang on, Jonathan, just a minute, I'll post the link.
Okay. And we can also post it on the FMDiSC list.
Oh, I can certainly do that too. Hang on just a second.
While Stephen's getting that, and any last questions or comments?
David, did you encounter anything unexpected when you were running FileMaker and the debugger and sort of stepping through stuff? Any surprises in there, or just sort of what you would expect?
Yeah, it's you're always only looking at a very tiny subsection, because if you look at the assembly instructions, there's of course lots of instructions going on when the program runs. But yeah, nothing that is totally out of the ordinary, I would say.
Did you notice any sort of, I don't know, scan for a checksum? Or I was just curious if you saw anything that would shed some light on how FileMaker's startup routine would sort of self-examine and say, oh, I'm a corrupt file, or, I'm not terminated properly, or, something like that, where it does a health check and says, whoa, this file's damaged, we shouldn't open it.
Yeah, so unrelated to the to this research, I know when FileMaker opens a file, there's one specific byte in the file that is flipped when the file is opened, and flipped back when it's closed. So whenever you force quit FileMaker, then obviously that byte cannot be flipped back. So it can then detect, when the file opens next time, it can then detect that the file was not properly closed. So that's one byte in the file that indicates that. And regarding the corruption, I haven't looked into this deeply, but what I assume they do is that they walk through the blocks, because each blocks know what the next block and the previous block is, and I would assume that when something like this doesn't add up, if they're orphan blocks or something, that FileMaker would probably then say that the file is might be corrupted, and I assume when you run recover, they might throw out the blocks that that are kind of orphaned, but that's just an assumption. I haven't validated that.
All right, well, we'll see what you dive into next, and you'll have to come back and do another presentation for the group.
Sure.
I hope to see you at future meetings.
Yeah, thanks again for having me.
Of course.
Thanks for staying up late.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is late for you there. All right, I'm going to wrap things up. Thank you, everyone, and we will see you in November.